Hey, everybody, if you could take a seat, please. We're going to start the meeting. Welcome to the November 8th, 2023 Camden Select Board meeting. We are broadcast live on Spectrum Cable TV channel 1303. We can also be found on the town YouTube channel, and you can stream via Zoom. If you'd like to participate via Zoom, please raise your hand, and our town manager will let you in. We do not monitor the chat function on Zoom, so if you'd like to speak via Zoom, please raise your hand. The first item on tonight's agenda is public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody from the public have a non-agenda item? Ms. Stone, please. Yes, to this podium. So just introduce yourself and.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Stone. It's nice to meet you. I'm the principal of the middle school right up the street here. I'm also a Camden resident. I'm coming to you to first thank you for what you do and for your support in helping improve our walkways and our crosswalks to school. You guys have partnered with us around a lot of efforts, some very grassroots, like putting signs in the middle of crosswalks and taking them in and out, and also helping put the flasher in on Knowlton Street. As you know, we did have a student struck there after school hours before that flasher was put in. So I'll just continue to remind us of the reality of a few of our crosswalk ways around the town that impact our students very heavily. It was great to address that issue, and I really appreciate it. What I'd like you to consider as you move into budget season is addressing some of the crosswalk concerns that we have on Washington Street. Dave St. Laurent and I met with the state and looked at the safe passage of crossing over Washington Street, essentially from one side of the road to the other. There were some things that he left with on a list for the town, like raising the height of signs that are otherwise harder to see, increasing visibility around it, tree trimming, those kind of things. So Dave sounds like he's on top of those. And then we did look at 3 crosswalks there, flasher systems. And again, he gave us a very rough estimate based on the work he's doing around the state, are running somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 per flasher system. So they are costly. We currently have 3 crosswalks on that road. That's a town road. So something to consider is condensing into 2, or possibly looking at all 3. We have a significant number of students that walk from all parts of the town to the school. Thanks for helping us keep the school in downtown Camden. And I'm just asking that you consider that in your budgeting process as you move forward. So whether Audra is your connection or Dave, there is more information from him about what to move forward with if you are able to consider adding that into your budget. I would say the other safety concern was crossing Free Street and Elm Street, which is a significant impact. We have students riding bikes from Rockport and walking. That is on the state list for next spring, so we're really excited about that. So that's a relief for us, and also coastal opportunities that crosses there as well. But those crosswalks on Washington Street are our current concern. Happy to answer any questions if you have any. If not, I just wanted to make a plea for some money to put in some equipment.
Jamie, our policy is not to ask questions
Sure.
During this time, but
Okay.
we will take the consideration
Thank you.
very significantly. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Oh,
Thanks.
and just so the rest of you know, I told Jamie about the budget workshop on January 25th and encouraged her to come to that. And she has it in her schedule to come. So
Perfect.
Okay.
Love to see you then.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any other public non-agenda items? Yes, sir, please.
Hello, I'm Chris Frieden. I'm the new-ish chairperson of the Historical Resources Committee. And I just wanted to say that I feel like I've been a little remiss by not coming here before and introducing myself. So hello. I wanted to ask if you could consider 2 process issues. One is my understanding that there was a vote at the last meeting about adding additional members to our Historical Resources Committee. And I just wanted to let you know a little bit of a backdrop that we have been actively trying to recruit members. So we set up a table at the last election. We've been interviewing people, talking to people. So we have been setting up a process for trying to bring in new membership. And we were trying to also create a pathway where people could volunteer on projects, then become an alternate member, and then eventually move to a permanent member. So I just found out last night that that vote had happened and that 2 people have been added to our committee, which came as a complete surprise to me. I did not know that. And I just wonder if you might want to look at that process where the committee could perhaps review applications or be involved in that, maybe even making a recommendation to the select board, and the select board vote on that endorsement rather than the other way around. I just thought that might be something to look at. And then secondly, when it comes to my term of office, I became a replacement member for the former chairperson who resigned, which means that I'm serving out the rest of his term. So that amounts to just 1 year of service. And given the amount of volunteer hours that I'll be putting in, I'm sure this is something that comes up for a lot of people. So just using myself as an example, I wonder if that term clock should start when the person actually starts serving a full 3-year term, rather than this clock where you're just serving out the last year of somebody else's term, because you put a considerable amount of time and effort into being a member of the committee, and for it to be truncated for just 1 year, and you can only serve twice, you're effectively losing 2 years of service that otherwise you might be able to do. So I'm just hoping that you can consider those 2 things. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge Pat Scaling and Michael Scaling, who were on the board previously, and who basically were highly instrumental in putting the plaque up at the Mount Batty Tower, and also putting the Great Fire District plaque outside of Camden National Bank. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge all their effort and work, because they basically made it happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for your efforts for the town. Any other non-agenda items? Seeing none, we move on to agenda item number 2, which is approval of board minutes from our October 17th meeting.
So I have a question on the minutes. And it's, Audrey, it's in your manager's report? Because I think there's one section that made 0 sense to me. And I'm wondering if it's not a transcription issue. And it is in the
Page 7.
God, where is it? Oh, wrong glasses to start with. It's the right, is it the right-of-way issues? Sorry, I made a note on my other computer.
Which topic?
I can't remember. Give me 1 sec. Oh, the alternative polling location. I don't understand this because due to potential weather-related challenges on March 5,
Mhm.
so we need an alternate polling station.
Yes. Yep, as opposed to the public safety building.
The fire trucks don't sit outside in the winter typically.
I see. Okay, so that, okay,
It's not a good thing for 'em.
okay.
Yeah.
And do we have an alternative polling location?
Yes. Yep, it would be this building.
So in the town office?
Yes. Yep.
Oh,
Okay.
what about the middle school?
Any other questions?
Thank
on
you.
the
Make
Or
a motion that
comments?
we approve.
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? You weren't here, so,
That's the standard.
yeah, that's
practice, right?
correct. So did we get 4? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
look left.
yeah.
Sorry. 4-0, motion carries. Thank you. Third item on tonight's agenda is select board reports. Chris, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Sophie and I both attended the EMS meeting on October 25. And
Stephanie.
Yeah.
Stephanie and Chris.
thank you,
I was like, wow. that's a
Stephanie.
shake-up.
Yes. Yeah, with an S. Anyway, Stephanie and I attended the EMS meeting on October 25th in Lincolnville. And, you know, a big part of the discussion is what's going to be coming up soon as far as changes to the contract in relationship to maintaining the services that are performed while there's a lack of revenue that the vendor is going through because of changes that occurred with Penn Bay and lack of transport. So ultimately, we'll be looking at getting information by January on what some of those changes might be. Other things in there as well is consideration of the type of service that we're looking for, of course. Is it, you know, certain towns may want 2 ambulances to show up, for example, at a multi-car accident as a matter of course, because of certain roads and intersections. Stipulations like that are not currently in the contract, and as a result, sometimes you have a multi-car, multi-person accident with only an ambulance and a paramedic and a fly car, which can't transport. So there will be some good things to look at in considering the type of service that we'll need. And regardless of what the town does long-term, EMS-wise, there's a time that we're going to have to, you know, deal with. They have 20 some odd folks Northeast doing the ambulance service. And so, you know, that's a lot of folks that we would need to supplement if we were going to do that ourselves. So there will be certainly a period of time, even if long-term we want to do more in-house, where we'll need vendor support, but the cost will be going up. And it's a consideration that will have to be done with the budget. And we mentioned that at the budget committee meeting too.
Thank you, Chris. Sophie?
Just a couple of meetings, super interesting. The first one was Nathan Fury came as part of the speaker series for the Megunticook River Citizens Advisory Committee. And he gave a really enlightening and interesting presentation on fish in rivers, and especially in rivers in Maine. And we were at the middle school, which was a really good venue for this. It was really nice. And I encourage everyone to look at the video, the recording if you haven't. And the other recording I encourage people to watch is a presentation that was made at the library by Ken Gross in the context of the historical month. And he invited a professor who specializes in the history of rivers and gave a fabulous talk about the history of the Hudson River with amazing graphics and relationships between people, river, businesses, animals, wildlife. It's weather is getting cold. Stay home, watch good videos. Those 2 meetings are really, really interesting with lots of good information. That's it.
Thank you, Sophie.
Was that Carrie Hardy's?
Yeah.
talk?
Yeah, it's really, really good.
Allison?
Are you skipping Stephanie? Or
Yep,
is it just
we'll
random
just
order?
work in, sure.
So the Camden Rockport Pathways Committee has been working on the Camden side of things, or actually for both Camden and Rockport, on updating their master plan, which is the priorities for what they suggest to the towns should be priorities for sidewalks. Jamie, if you ever want to attend one of those meetings, I'm sure they'd love your input. But there is a document that they developed for Camden in 2007 and Rockport, I believe, in 2015. Both of those are being updated with priorities. So a lot of discussion about the worst sidewalks, the places where there should be sidewalks. If anybody is interested in seeing a draft of that and wants to get involved. And at some point, they asked me to sort of ask about what would be the best way to communicate that document with the select board. Should they be encouraged to put it out to the public and get a bunch of input and then bring it to the select board, or bring it to the select board at an earlier stage and get some input? At some point, I want to give them some feedback about how they should do that. The Conservation Commission has been continuing with the mapping applications. So both mapping invasive plants on IMAP invasives, and then also the tree locations. So the street tree planting where they find willing property owners and locations for street trees, and then Public Works goes out and plants those. We have that app. Also now we are working on incorporating the ash tree database. A few years back, an intern had identified all of the specimen ash trees in Camden that in the event that the emerald ash borer comes to Camden, which it eventually will, and it'll eventually kill all the ash trees that are not treated. And so years ago, we went through the process of identifying in town all of the ones, existing ash trees, and then especially specimen ash trees, like ones that would be really special to try to save. And back then, the Conservation Commission encouraged us to find ways to budget for that eventual cost. And there had been talk about trying to use tree-related fines as, a way to maybe fund that. So working on that. Historic Resources Committee, you heard a little bit from Chris, very active committee over there. They're doing a lot of things. One of the things relating to the comprehensive plan that we've talked about before is the potential ordinance that would allow Camden to become a certified local government with the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, which is basically an ordinance that would regulate historic districts and historic properties and create rules around those properties with the goal of protecting historic areas. So they've been looking at lots of different ordinances in different places, seeing what the options are for Camden, and working with Jeremy some too. So that's always generated lots of discussion in the past. So eventually that should be a topic of conversation for us. And along those lines, they've done some things to highlight historic districts in the town, like the Great Fire District. Some new signage has gone up, and then a new marker at the Mount Batty Tower. A number of people were involved in helping with that. Tom Jackson moved this big boulder for them. Pat Scaling has done lots of work. So all those meetings are on YouTube, and you can get more information there if you'd like. That's it. Oh, and then just a little bit, I do think because I missed 2 select board meetings in a row, and also due to some family health things, but a little bit of confusion with the committee stuff. I think part of this might be a failure of my liaisoning to the committees. Some of that we just might need to review that a little bit at some point, because I also got some feedback from the Conservation Commission that they had previously checked with some of the people who had said they weren't interested anymore, and maybe some other people were, but new spots open up all the time, so I'm not too concerned. But I think that a lot of it probably comes down to the fact that I wasn't here for that and hadn't communicated with the committees about that being on the agenda. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Allison. Stephanie?
All right, I have a list here of things that I have attended since the last select board meeting. I did attend the McGonagall Advisory Committee talk on the fish. That was interesting. I attended the parking meeting that we had here, the parking group, and that should be coming forward to the select board very shortly. Allison and I'm labeling it, had a CMP day out in Augusta with the president of CMP, which we kept him about an hour and a half longer than he wanted to be, I think.
I think he was like the president of something, not the whole thing, right?
So, yeah. So then we had a talk about, and a whole tour of the facility and the whole CSI wall where they control all the grids. And it's actually a really interesting.
You're not allowed to take pictures.
No, not allowed to take pictures. They were like watching you. It was actually a really cool discussion. And I think Camden Rotary might be having somebody from there soon. So it might be something to watch out for. I did attend the EMS workshop that we had here for our own fire department. That was really interesting. A lot of cool ideas being thrown around. definitely more on that, I'm sure, in the budget process and talks going forward. I did also attend the EMS performance meeting. That was really interesting. The talk seemed to be going a little bit deeper than when I first started going. We are talking about what is the next contract going to look like, what does it need to look like, what kind of things should we add into. Everything Chris said was really important on what kind of service we want, what do we expect, what are we going to change the contract to look like. I watched the planning board meeting because I missed that. That was really interesting, and we voted on a lot of the things that there were discussion, I think, in that. I did not watch the budget committee, but that is on my agenda. I haven't had a lot of time. Christmas by the Sea is coming up December 1st through the 3rd. That's a big town event. Definitely come out and see that. I did have a lot of emails about a discussion when we were talking about the Harbor Committee. And I just feel like I'm going to say, for me, I wish that I had spoken up and said something about the discussion that was had. When we have applicants that we may not agree with, I think we need to do better at that discussion. It's been 2 years in a row that I've left the meeting when we've been doing committees, and I've thought, oh, I should have said that's enough and move along, instead of having the conversation go more and more into almost a disrespectful nature to an applicant on any level at all. And I am actually really sorry that I didn't speak up and say, I think this conversation has gone far enough. So I'm going to do better with that myself. And I think that we should task each other to do better when we have conversations like that in the future.
Thank you, Stephanie. I only have one thing tonight, and that is I want to talk to the board just a little bit about the way we attend committee and board meetings. We had at the parking meeting, the parking group, we had 3 board members try and attend one meeting, and that we can't do that because that constitutes a quorum. So what I'm going to ask and just to move forward is that if you'd like to attend a committee or a board meeting and you're not the liaison, that you let Audra know that you're gonna attend, and then she can announce it as a board meeting if more than 3 members want to attend that meeting, or more than 2 members, I should say. So, if you want to attend the planning board, Stephanie and I are the liaisons, or the river committee. Sophie and Chris are the liaisons. So they'll get the first, obviously, opportunity to attend those meetings. And then the third member in, or in the other cases where the committee only has 1 liaison, if you're not the liaison, please let Audra know that you'd like to attend. That should help
How
us.
soon do we have to let you know?
Is it 24 hours you'd need?
24 hours is fine.
Allison?
So what I read in the Maine Municipal Officers Handbook about this topic is there's a little bit of a distinction between attending as an attendee and attending as a participant. So, showing up at a planning board public hearing to say something, to sit in the audience and say something, I don't think legally, I don't think that does need to be noticed to the public that Allison is, there are going to be 3 select board members in the audience. If it's a decision-making capacity, that's different, or?
So I asked this exact same question to Bill, and he wrote me a great email that I can forward to you. But Bill, if you'd like to elaborate on that just a little bit now.
Is Mike?
So yeah, the general perspective of MMA has gotten softer over the last 30 years about this topic. But I think it's about perception, and it's also about participation. As in committees that are appointed by the select board, or which they all are, you have a different role when you show up there, because you just have this mantle of being an elected official.
Mhm.
And if you're going to be there, and there's going to be more than 3 of you, and you want to start participating, which you may do, you can always qualify how you're speaking, but it also eliminates it's trying to address both showing up and participating to have a notice. And then it's a good practice, let me put it that way. And it's a better practice than not having that. And then you don't have the discussion by anybody of you've now had an illegal meeting because you're three there and one of you is speaking and it appears you're speaking for everybody. So that's the gist of it. It's just better practice.
Yeah, so I guess my question would be the same as, like, how far, if we have to notice it 24 hours?
Yeah, just let Audra know and she'll make it a select board meeting. She'll notice it as a select board meeting.
I mean, even if you don't know if you can attend or not, just err on the side of telling me you're going to. And I mean, there's no harm in me, telling
Okay.
everyone it's a select board meeting and then only 2 of you show up and it's not.
Right, that's what I was kind of wondering, like, what if I change my mind at the last time? Like,
Yeah.
don't go to the planning board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd
That
say
makes
like,
sense, that's fine.
if you have any sort of inkling that you'd like to attend, just let me know and it's an easy thing for us to do.
Thank you.
So since I did let you know with the parking meeting during the select board meeting, in the last time we met, I guess notice should have been taken, or it should have just been a better race to the door and I should have been faster.
Well, I think it's a lot to ask of me to remember everything everybody says at a select board meeting.
Let's not get sidetracked. Let's make this our policy moving forward.
Yep.
Let's just keep our eyes forward here. Next item on the agenda tonight is the town manager's report. Audra?
Sure. So I'm going to send this to you all in writing because there's a lot that I'm not going to go over in my report. I'll try to just hit on the high notes. So I'm in the very early stages of negotiating an access agreement with SBA Towers, which is the company that owns the land and the communications tower on top of Ragged Mountain. So where the tower is, it's actually in Rockport and it's on land that's owned by that company. But they need to cross the Snowball property if any of their lessees want to do work on that tower. They are a company from Florida. They weren't familiar with the site. They thought that because they own the land, they typically don't own the land that their towers sit on. So they were not aware of the fact that it was a landlocked parcel and they were completely dependent on the town for their electrical equipment getting up to the site, as well as any access to do work on the site, needing to have an agreement with the town, or their lessees needing to have an agreement with the town. So we're in the very early stages of that. So the agreement's really going to focus on financial contribution from SBA Towers to stabilize and repair the erosion to the access road that runs up the mountain that's alongside the triple chairlift. So that road is going to be decommissioned because it was not constructed in a way that it can be maintained over time. It's straight up instead of taking a more winding path up the mountain. So it's very, it's very easily damaged and eroded, and it's just not sustainable to have it there in perpetuity and keep repairing it. And the lessees, without permission, had used it numerous times and caused a lot of damage to it. So they're going to fix the damage to it, and they're also going to provide a contribution to a new access road that's going to wind up the mountain that'll be included as part of the site law planning process that we're doing in collaboration with Coastal Mountain Land Trust and some of the other folks that we're working with on that. So it's in the early stages, but they're aware of where we're going with it, and everybody seems to agree that focusing on the access to the site and the means of getting up there is appropriate given what their needs are and what ours will be from them. Also, in regards to the Snowball, when patching the roof to the modular building that currently houses Side Country Sports in the race program, there were several issues with the condition of the building that just made it clear that it can't be further repaired. So today we met with folks from Side Country Sports in the race program to come up with a plan for this year and where everybody's going to go. And we're going to also look at sort of this interim period over the next 5 to 10 years while we're working on all the fundraising and the construction of the new lodge. So making sure that we have, a good place to house all the different users at the Snowball. And that'll be brought forward at the next select board meeting for all of you to make a decision on. As everybody's talking about, the parking management group met on the 26th of October to review the 2023 paid parking program and make recommendations for the 2024 season. So there's a bunch of work that needs to be done in the background, research on implementing some of these recommendations and whether or not they can be implemented. So once we have the details nailed down, we'll bring this to the select board for review. I also had a meeting with a representative from GoNetSpeed. They're the company that's doing the major fiber optic internet deployment throughout town. They're interested in becoming more involved in the community, and of course they're interested in the town's business. So I think it's worth having that conversation with them about what they might be able to offer us.
Especially
Because-
in areas that are underserved right now, would be great.
Absolutely. And I explained to them some of the rural areas, and because they have lots of different partnerships all over the country, and I don't quite understand how it works, they think that there's a way of getting faster speeds to some of the more rural areas without them actually doing the deployment and working off other networks. The Planning Codes Development Director and I met with representatives from the Lupine Terrace Homeowners Association on some of the erosion issues that the subdivision is experiencing that's at the outfall of their stormwater collection system. And due to the water quality issues that, sorry, I moved my own screen so I couldn't see it. Some of the water quality issues that are caused by the erosion to the Maguntacook River, the current grant that we have from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, funding was included for field work and engineering and design to look at, because it's a tributary of the river, to look at this issue and give them some guidance on how to address it. And that's a real relief for a lot of the people who own homes in that subdivision, because it was developed as affordable housing. So, a $30,000 project to fix that issue it has a huge impact on a lot of people that live there. So, any assistance in addressing that issue would be, very helpful for everybody that lives in that subdivision. And one of the reasons I'm bringing it up now is because we've got a number of different subdivisions in town with stormwater systems that they just, they haven't been maintained over the time. And it's really not the fault of the HOAs. They weren't really well equipped or, given a lot of direction or instructions or knowledge on how to maintain these systems. And they really have an impact on, water quality in town, as well as, a number of different, sort of more public concern. The stormwater infrastructure services the road infrastructure. So if the town is committed to taking over the roads, managing the stormwater is an important part of that. So, I think as a board, this is a continuation of a discussion that earlier boards had about, it started really with the Pleasant Ridge subdivision and their stormwater system and an issue they had going on there. So I think that once they've sort of addressed that issue at the Pleasant Ridge area, we're working with Lupine Terrace on their issue now. And I think the Greenfield subdivision, there's a HOA that no longer exists, but the infrastructure is still there and it's not being maintained. So this is really something that I think the board needs to look at a bit comprehensively, because the impacts of that not being maintained, it's broader than just the people that live in that subdivision. The Mid-Coast Council of Governments is having their annual meeting on November 16th at Watts Hall in Thomaston, and they have an excellent speaker that is incredibly relevant to Camden. So it's on something called amenity trap communities. So these are the Mid-Coast, we've got lots of them here. So these are communities with, really wonderful natural resources like mountains and oceanfront and lakefront, and communities that are experiencing a lot of new residents moving to them, a lot of tourists in the summer, and the impacts of that on the the year-round residents, and what can be done to address some of the challenges that communities like ours face. So I think that that's going to be a really good session if anybody can attend it. And it just gets you more familiar with the Mid-Coast Council of Governments. We are members, and
Date and time again?
sorry, it's November 16th at Watts Hall in Thomaston, and I'll send you through the details on that. And I
What time of
asked
day?
them, what's that?
Time of day?
It's a day-long session, so the presenter will be there. I think they're presenting kind of in the morning, and then there's panel discussions later in the day that they'll be moderating. So it's like a full day's worth of events. I'll send you through the details on, times and that kind of thing.
If you
And-
could recommend like one section of time that maybe is that?
I'd say in the beginning when he does his sort of keynote speech, but I'll give you the details on it. I believe it's kind of later in the morning that's going to happen. I'll have to look through the agenda for the meeting. Amenity trap. And I can send you through the paper on it. It's really interesting. They were very confident that, because I said, I think there might be quite a few Camden people who would be interested in this and would like to come. And the executive director said, send as many as interested. It's a good problem for us to have more of you there than less. So anybody who's interested is welcome. We also had a meeting with representatives of the Ragged Mountain Foundation, just about working together to plan for and fundraise for the next stage of the development of the year-round recreation area out there, particularly the lodge and the community center. So this is sort of just the initial discussions about that, and hopefully we'll be able to come to the board sooner to talk about moving that forward. The organizing meeting of the budget committee was on Thursday, November 2nd. It was supposed to be on, I believe it was the 26th or 27th. It got moved anyway because the Midcoast Forum on Foreign Relations rented the Opera House for Heather Cox Richardson, which was just an amazingly popular event that unfortunately was canceled. But the first meeting of the budget committee, it was the organizational stuff that we typically do at the first meeting in March. We're trying to sort of front load a lot of that stuff in the fall so that when we get to the March budget review meetings, we can focus more on review of the budget and less on background information about the town and how it functions and the departments and what they do and who does what where. So I think that, and also the select board is going to be participating with the budget committee throughout the process. So I think some of those changes are just going to make it more enjoyable for everybody involved. So with the assessing office, they're creating more content for the Reval website, which is camdenreval.com. They've been researching some tax relief ideas in other towns in Maine and states. So that's going to be something hopefully that we can talk about with the select board when we have a few ideas and proposals to bring forward. They've submitted the LD 290 reimbursement claim with Maine Revenue Services. So that was all kinds of work that they did on the property tax stabilization law that was passed, because that was a tremendous amount of work for the assessing office. That was really all that they were able to do for a few months when they were processing those applications. They're updating tax maps in preparation for refreshing the online database, and also just working on a number of better applications. So with the fire department, they had a successful mutual aid training exercise with Union, Rockport, Hope, and Lincolnville on the 28th of October. This is something that everybody got a lot of value out of, and they would like to do this on an annual basis. And they have a tentative plan to do a similar training exercise in the fall of 2024 in Lincolnville. They're also, the fire department has been our point department because the fire chief's the EMA director. So they're gathering all the documentation and the administrative paperwork for FEMA for the December 23rd, 2022 storm. So that's still ongoing for anybody who's interested. So in Opera House news, technical director Juniper Purington gave her notice. So her last day will be Friday. So she's taking a position as the technical director at the Waterville Opera House. So just wanted to thank Juniper for her work with the town. She's done a lot for us, and definitely leaving the Opera House in a better place than she found it, and very excited for her in Waterville because it sounds like a great opportunity, and it's right in line with all the things that she's best at and most interested in. So congratulations and thank you, Juniper. So in order to, make sure there's no sort of gap in service when she leaves, we have a number of freelance techs that run shows at the Opera House that'll be helping out in the interim period where we're figuring out what comes next with that role. So skipping down, so on December 4th, Knowles Industrial Services will begin the old dam gate removal and installation of the new gate at the Montgomery Dam. So in preparation for this, we're going to need to lower lake levels so that's not something that we need to contend with while the gate installation is taking place. Work continues on Pearl Street, so the curbing has been installed. The sidewalk is being backfilled and fine graded in preparation for the binder coat of asphalt. And that will happen on both sort of the binder coat on the sidewalks on both Pearl Street and Central Street around, I'd say, November 10th is when they're planning. The backfilling of the curb and the loaming, that's going to be the final thing that's done for this year. And then it'll be sort of closed up for the winter. And the very final stuff like the seeding, loaming, and of course the final final course of pavement will happen in the spring. So Public Works, Deergo Engineering, and MDOT conducted a site visit to John Street to review the new sidewalk drainage and sewer project that we've talked about. So we received a heads up grant to install a new sidewalk from Symington Road to Elm Street. So that's a $750,000 grant. The stretch of sidewalk, it's great because it'll connect the newly installed sidewalk on Pearl Street as well. And Deergo Engineering is going to put together the estimate for the cost of the sewer work because we have estimates at this stage for everything else.
Audra, what side of John Street is the new sidewalk going to be?
I don't think we know at this
You
point.
don't know yet? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Are we going to have any water lines or anything like that? Pearl Street just ended up growing into like all these other things. Are we
Oh, do you mean like
anticipating
laterals? Like laterals?
all of it?
So there is no sewer in the section that we're going to be working on.
Okay.
On John, so that's a big part of the project. So because it's new sewer, it'll have the tie-in for the services, but we won't need to look at replacing any
Okay.
old services.
So I'm not going to say it.
It's a little more
So-
predictable, I think.
So
Don't wanna
what
say
I'm
it out
going,
loud,
what
Tom.
we're assuming, what we've told the engineer to assume going into this is that we're going to have to blast through ledge for the entirety of that section where there's no sewer. It's just easier to plan for it and then be surprised if it's not, or be pleasantly surprised if it's not there, than be surprised that it is. So
Like Pearl Street. Yeah.
yes, so we'd rather just plan for that being something that we have to contend with on that job.
Legend Maine, who knew?
Yeah, when we live right next to Rockport and Rockland and
We
So-
thought we escaped.
right. So those are the sort of highlights, but like I said, there's a lot more going on. So I'll email everybody a copy of the report and post it online.
Thank you, Audra. Item 5A, B, and C is our consent agenda tonight. Approval of closure of Atlantic Avenue for a Winterfest at the Camden Public Library, Saturday, January 27th. A poll permit for underground utilities for the new construction at Stonehurst Drive, and renewal of lodging and victular licenses for the Camden Windward House, Drift Oceanside Inn, Free Street Inn, Hartshore Inn, Hideaway Inn, and Snow Dogs. Any comments on the consent agenda tonight?
I didn't realize that Stonehurst was a public road. It is?
It's a poll, and the poll may be within our right of way.
I just thought it was a private road that we wouldn't have jurisdiction over, but it must not be if they're asking our permission, right?
I didn't look closely to see. I did look at it. I couldn't really tell where the new poll was going to be. But if it's in our, if they're asking our permission, it's within our right of way,
So we can go drive up around there, huh?
I suppose. Take your dog for a walk. Anybody have anything?
I have no problem. with the
Okay,
consent agenda.
nothing, with no objections, the consent agenda is approved. Item 6 tonight is a public hearing, application of Jason Doppelt, doing business as Snow Dogs for a special amusement permit. Is Jason here tonight?
Is he online?
He's not. Do
Nope.
we have any background on this application, Audra?
Janice, is Jason online?
You will, right?
Okay.
That's what they did last year.
Yep.
Like their Friday night jam sessions.
Yeah, I think there is some information in the packet about it, where he wants to do it on the floor of the lodge. I'm just struggling to find it.
The upper floor of the snowball.
What page, Sophie?
On mine is 15.
Page 15.
Yeah.
I don't know how to see what page it is.
Your bookmark will take you right to it.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the application as received.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Item 7A, approval of the 2024 meeting schedule. Janice put a proposed schedule in our packet. I had a couple things that I wanted to mention. One is just the possibility, it doesn't really affect me too much, but January 2nd is awfully close to the holidays. And we could bump those to the 9th and 23rd for that month.
I think it's a good idea because
So
then
autumn
we have the 30th and then the 6th. So we go back into having one every other week.
Okay, so
Isn't the 23rd also a holiday? I'm sorry. The 22nd is,
the 23rd,
22nd.
Yeah.
The 15th is the holiday.
The 15th,
Oh, it
yeah.
is?
So the 23rd.
Oh,
would
you
work
get 2
better
for
in
1
that.
special that way. One move, both meetings, and you avoid both holidays.
There you go.
Happy 3-day weekend.
so 9 and 23, we have a
9 and
consensus.
23, yep.
Okay, we'll change that. Everybody okay with February?
Yep.
Good.
March, we do have the option to go 12 and 26 in March, or we could stick with the 6th and the 19th.
6 and 19 is fine.
Okay. April 2 and 16?
So
April 2, there's a budget committee meeting. So is this the joint budget committee meeting workshop?
April, oh, is that the,
That's what I
yeah,
have.
that's when the budget committee will come into your meeting and you'll,
Okay.
Yep.
So it's, okay, I get it.
May 7 and 21? No objections. June 4 and 18? July, I do, if we're going to do 2 and 16, I'm going to miss the 16 meeting. If we went the 2nd and the 23rd, I could attend both.
Let's do that.
So we'll move
Mhm.
to 2 and 23 for July? Okay. August, we have 6 and 20, or go ahead, Sophie. Excuse me.
So usually, I mean, in my experience, we don't look at the calendar post-June because you don't know who's going to be on the board.
We actually do, and it causes
Oh, do we?
problems. Yeah.
Because I thought I remember we didn't do that until we had a new, and then, because we revisited when we have a new board.
it's just
I remember
a
being like,
tentative-
well, I'm going to vote on this, but I don't know if I'm going to be elected or not.
Yeah,
So
It's a tentative thing.
You
Not
can
a
do
great
whatever you
process,
want. I mean,
but-
I,
I think it'd be nice to do a tentative schedule and we could revisit it
can
again.
revisit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2 and 23 for July. August, I see either we could go 6 and 20, or we could go 13 and 27. I don't have does anybody have any conflicts summertime?
Well, if you go 13 and 27, it would probably line up better to move September to 10 and 24 for the same holiday reason that you moved January. And so that it keeps it in a better alternating thing.
So August,
just as a
September.
warning about doing any of that, people get very confused when we don't have it on the first and the third
Yeah, we do.
Tuesdays.
Well,
really?
twice in
yeah.
a row maybe that they're not.
So what's the consensus? Do we want to stay with the 1st and 3rd in August and September, or move to the 2nd and 4th? I don't have a strong feeling. Chris, do you? You want to move them or no?
I don't have any-
We'll just leave them where they are? Okay, stays where Janice put them. October 1st and 15th. November 6 and 19, just holler. And December 3 and 17. So the only changes we've made at this time are January, we're going to go 9 and 23, and July, we're going to go 2 and 23. Great, thank you.
March will be a fun day in the town office. Do you need a motion on that, or are we just good?
I don't think we need to know. Action, item 7B, approval of main DOT construction permit for the Rossin Avenue Bridge removal. Audra, can we get some background on that?
Yeah, so this was kind of like a head scratcher for all of us as well. This is something under statute. They ask the municipal officers when they're doing a project in the community to approve it. I honestly haven't seen them ask this for other projects that we've had with MDOT. So I'm not sure if this is new or if this is something that, maybe they just forgot to send the letter out and ask in the past, and it's a practice they're picking up again.
Is there anything in here that takes anything away that we normally, you know what I mean? Like, is there anything that's going to happen because of this permit that you wouldn't anticipate happening?
No, because this is the project we're working on
Right.
together with them.
Okay.
I mean, not this portion of it is all MDOT, but we're working on the new bridge, of course, with them.
Is it because it's a town road, but it's it's their bridge, but it's working on a town road, whereas a
That's-
lot of the time they own the whole thing?
That's probably why now that you say that, that's probably what it is, because most of the projects that we do with them, it's all on MDOT's roads.
Yeah.
And the only thing, they just own the bridge. They don't own Rossin Ave.
Sophie?
I just had a question because I was on the amount of the bond that we're asking them to take, right? Do we wait on, do they determine it? Do we determine it? I wasn't not completely
A
sure.
Performance bond.
Right, no, for the repairs. To cover repairs if they, because
Oh,
they put
yeah.
trucks on the right of way or on, so who determines, I'm just curious who determines that amount and do we think
That's
it's sufficient?
MDOT.
It's them, so they're like, the maximum we're gonna pay is this, so
Yeah.
if we incur additional ones, it's for us.
I would
Interesting.
imagine though that that's something that we could work with them on if that happens.
That was my only question, I was just.
Yeah, but it's on that same piece on the next page about the municipality may require the contractor to attain a bond because of the over limit loads.
This is like our road opening ordinance would connect to that, right? Or somebody would that be like a public works director reviews what the bond, what it should be, or
Yeah.
They can also work with the DOT on that. There will be some historic precedent that the DOT
Yeah.
could give them, other municipalities,
I'll
if we
make a
want to
motion.
direct Dave that way.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we approve. If you want me to.
Yeah, I second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? 5-0, motion carries. Item 7C, approval of consent agreement with Arthur D. III and Amelia Bond. Jeremy, would you want to speak on this?
Sure. You are all well aware, this has been a long time coming. It's been over a year. It's been about a year, actually, since this started. This has to do with the application of a herbicide on 3 Metcalf Road by the Bonds who live at 1 Metcalf Road. It's a long process. I issued a notice of violation to them. to the bonds. They worked with Mrs. Gorman, the owner of 3 Metcalf Road, and her attorney, and lots of consultants involved. I included in the packet some communication from both bonds attorneys as well as Gorman's attorneys, and also included the Board of Pesticide Control consent agreement that was signed with the bonds. Bill and I negotiated a long time. It took them to get to this point. And we feel like this is a fair and appropriate penalty for what they did. The bonds have accepted responsibility. The proposed agreement has them paying $180,000 to the town for penalties of the shoreline, 2 violations of the shoreline zoning section of our Chapter 290, which is the zoning code. And then there's a $30,000 penalty that they will pay that will cover the cost of CV Mahar, which is an environmental consulting firm doing environmental testing at Lake Beach property. CV Mahar is ready to get going on that, to do that. The bonds will be liable for any potential herbicide or contamination that we find or that they may find on Lake Beach property. I don't suspect there's going to be any, but we don't know.
We haven't tested at all.
No, and I will say this is one of the things that their attorney was like, well, why haven't you tested it yet? And I said, well, because we don't have the money budgeted and we're waiting for your $30,000 to cover it.
Right.
So the bonds agreed to this last week. I think Bill and I got a copy of this agreement last week. It should resolve it. I will say that all of the soil from that property and all of the trees and vegetation, and we're talking oak trees, this big around, and all of the soil were all removed from the property, and they were hauled up to Juniper Ridge landfill and treated as hazardous waste. And the bonds paid for that. And new soil was brought in, trees were planted, vegetation was planted. So they did work with Mrs. Gorman to establish new plant material there and new trees. They are taking responsibility, and it's a pretty significant, I think, statement of the seriousness of the issue and our approach to resolving it. So I'm hoping that you guys will sign this, or you will approve it with condition that they pay that $180,000 and $30,000 within 30 days. Any questions? Comments?
Will if Lake Beach and the town park adjacent is contaminated, will the town not only seek reimbursement for remediation, but also will we seek damages for contaminating town property, endangering town citizens, endangering our children, our visitors?
They're going to be liable and responsible for dealing with the issue and
Will
cleaning
we
it
seek
up.
damages?
I would think that we'd still be able to seek damages for trespass of an herbicide onto our property.
So in excess to remediation costs? We can.
Yes, we haven't limited our right to issue a notice of
Right.
violation.
Okay. I mean, we're potentially dealing with a situation where we have an environmental impact on people to go to that area. Our citizens,
I mean, I
children,
would add
visitors,
that
our wildlife.
I would add that I go to Lake Beach regularly to look at the vegetation that's there, that's down gradient of the site, and none of the vegetation that I have seen has suffered any impacts from the herbicide application that happened uphill.
But it does say right here in multiple locations that it travels with water. So
Correct.
the chances of this not being in our harbor are very low. I mean, it's all over this. Do not use alligator to bertherion herbicide in an area where
I know.
desirable species are in the vicinity of plants. I mean,
It got into the harbor.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The root system also of all kinds of different vegetation spreads like way more than we see.
I just want to read a little bit. The environment, the EPA's do you know how to pronounce this? Bertherion?
To Berthrionia? Yeah.
Registration eligibility
Alligator.
suggests Tiberthurian is resistant to biological and chemical degradation, and its principal route of dissipation appears to be transport to ground and surface water.
Yep. Understand, and we are limited right now on the violations that we can, notice that they violated. The Board of Pesticide Control at the state level is the entity that really would go after and did go after them. They paid a penalty to the state of $4,500.
So item 26 goes through all the labeling on the product.
Yep.
That says, don't apply it. Basically, don't apply it. It's
Yep.
dangerous. It contaminates. It kills.
Yep.
It travels with groundwater, which obviously is very mobile. And then item 27 says Amelia Bond applied this substance in the vicinity of plant species in the air. Again, all the things that it says to not do with it.
Yep.
In the vicinity of plant species, in an area of bedrock, and that is directly downslope and within a certain distance of the application where the areas of exposed bedrock, and this
And you can't apply it on residential properties either.
and it's illegal in the state of Maine, correct?
It's not illegal in the state of Maine. It's not used in the state of Maine. The state has never seen it used before, but it's not technically illegal in the state of Maine.
Okay, because we've never.
One,
Go ahead. Yes,
one of the
please.
questions, no, this is a good conversation, but one of the questions I have is, we're going to test once, but how are we monitoring this? Because if we test once and we can find it,
I will say we have engaged CV Mahar, which is a very reputable environmental consulting firm. They reviewed all the reports that we had from the consultants that were involved in this. They looked at the Board of Pesticide Control information, and they came up with a testing and monitoring program to address that issue on our property. I'm not an environmental consultant. I can't speak to it. I leave that to the professionals. They're confident that they'll be able to find anything there. It doesn't sit in soil for very long. It moves. I was shocked to see those large oak trees this big sitting on really just a few feet of soil, because there is ledge right there.
Right.
My gut says, again, I'm not a consultant, but it hit the ground, hit the ledge and just moved.
I'm just wondering how we monitor the situation.
Understand.
I think it's a good resolution, but the future.
Allison.
Is it possible to determine whether it has been taken up in the roots of trees or vegetation nearby? Does part of the testing include
As I
testing?
understand that if it's taken up by any vegetation, it would kill that vegetation very rapidly, like it did on the property of Mrs. Gorman.
It doesn't matter the quantity?
As I understand
Some
it, it
vegetation
would kill
doesn't.
it very quickly.
So they'll only be testing the soil?
They'll be testing soil and groundwater there at the location.
Do we, see, you say that definitively it got into the harbor?
I don't see how it couldn't have,
Yeah.
given where it was applied and how it moves.
So that would impact rockweed potentially. Does it have any impact on rockweed, or, we could,
I can't really speak to it. We're getting into something, this is really, I think, I understand the concern, and I totally get it. But the Board of Pesticide Control is the entity that regulates the application of herbicides off-label in the state, and that's what they did. We have no jurisdiction to regulate pesticide application out in the harbor. That's the Board of Pesticide Control, or how it would have impacted the harbor by chance.
Just a moment. Ladies, if you'd like to say something, a private conversation, if you could take it outside. If you have something to say on this agenda item, we are going to have public comment. I'm sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
All I was saying was that it's the Board of Pesticide Control's jurisdiction of the actual application of herbicide. Our issue was that it wasn't really the application of herbicide. It was that in order to deal with the herbicide that was applied and the dead and dying plant material and soil, Mrs. Gorman wanted all those trees and vegetation to go away. So by removing all those trees and the vegetation, that was the shoreline zoning violation. That violated the clearing standard. That violated the too much basal area removed in a 10-year period, which is a shoreline zoning standard. That's what we're issuing this. That's what the notice of violation is. That's what the consent agreement resolves. We don't have jurisdiction to go after them for herbicide that might have gotten into the harbor.
There's no criminal prosecution for this because it's not illegal in the state of Maine to poison your neighbor's soil?
The, I don't know that anybody made a referral to the, either the Attorney General or the District Attorney. I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head that this would constitute a crime as opposed to a trespass and.
It seems
ordinance
very intentional to
violations.
me. I'm reading off of page 58 of the packet here, which is, I believe, prepared by the Gorman's attorney, and it says, this is the last paragraph. It says, by way of background, in mid-June 2022, Amelia Bond approached Mrs. Gorman and asked her if she was willing to share in the cost of cutting down a number of large oak trees on Mrs. Gorman's property, stating that the trees did not look good. Mrs. Bond did not tell Mrs. Gorman during that encounter that she had already applied to the oaks a powerful herbicide she brought with her from St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah.
I mean,
the answer
there's
to your
intent
question is
here.
that there's a board that has jurisdiction, which was the board that created that consent agreement. That's how pesticides are regulated in the state.
Have we received like an apology letter? Like, to me, I don't see any remorse here. I don't think money, my impression is money's not an issue for these people. The fine doesn't do it. It doesn't matter, in my opinion. I think this is egregious. I think it's the documentation, which is very cut and dry, it lays it out as something was intentional and premeditated. And
I get that. I mean, I think, the herbicide application is what it is. I mean, we have to look at this as again, violations of the shoreline zoning section of our code. Much like if someone went and cut all those trees down, right? It's the same. It's about tree removal.
it's not though, because poisoning.
I get that, but we only have the authority that we have, and we're bound by that. And this is a violation of shoreline zoning. It's not a violation of, we don't have anything that says an ordinance that prohibits herbicide application in the shoreline zone. If we had something like that, we could go after them for that as well, and that would be a different violation. But we don't have something like that. I'm disappointed that the state of Maine fines them $4,500. I mean, it's shocking. I actually sat in on that consent agreement with the Board of Pesticide Control. Their attorneys didn't show up. No one was in, I had to, and they normally don't take comment from the public unless you submit it to them ahead of time. I raised my hand and they took some comment from me. It was clear that the Board of Pesticide Control was appalled at what they did. And they said that, but they're limited by what their fines are or their abilities are. I mean, a $4,500 fine is crazy to me for doing something like this. The $180,000 fine, to be honest, they came back and we're looking at asked for a $30,000 fine from us. And I said, absolutely not happening. You're more than welcome to come to the select board and ask for $30,000, but it's not happening. And Bill and I went back and forth with them for a while.
You should have told them, maybe they'd consider it if you come and talk to them.
We tried. They rejected that offer. And they came back with, they agreed to what I started out at 180 with them. They were like, okay, this is serious. And keep in mind that the 180, it's got to be reasonable and appropriate compared to other violations and other penalties. And I had done a lot of research looking at how the state went after people, DEP from under natural resource protection. I looked at other towns under shoreline zoning that went to either court for a judgment or went to a consent agreement with the municipality. And this is way up there compared to a lot of those. Most 90% of those, this fine is way up there compared to other communities. There were other ones that I saw. Someone had gone in and spiked in the shoreline zone, spiked trees, and then put salt into the base of trees to do, in essence, do the same thing as the herbicide was done. Not
Sort
the
of.
same thing.
Again,
The
it kills
intent
the
was the same.
trees,
The
but it
intent was
doesn't-
the same,
yeah.
to kill the trees.
Correct, but it doesn't poison the surrounding environment.
Understood. And again, if we had something that we could go after people for herbicide application in the shoreline zone, then we would have.
Anywhere, actually, for that
We-
matter.
We
by
should,
the
we
way.
should consider that.
About
I get it.
Allison?
Yes, I was going to make comments about how we might think about future ordinances, but also my understanding, the Gormans themselves, they could have chosen to pursue some kind of criminal trespassing or vandalism or something like that. It's really a private property matter that we are applying our shoreland zoning ordinance to because that makes sense.
Mhm.
But that's the only reason that it makes sense for us to be involved. If it hadn't, if she had just
Involved.
attempted to kill the trees, but they hadn't actually died and the trees hadn't
Correct.
been cut down, then we wouldn't have done
Correct.
anything. So it's really, if it had been done on our property, then we could have decided, well, we would like to pursue some kind of vandalism or some kind
Uh-huh.
of different type of, look for a way to
Yes, and all
use
that.
a criminal charge. But that was really, that decision was really in the hands of the Gormans and how they would.
And
handle
I mean,
it.
to be honest, I think the Gormans were willing and ready to go down that road had they not agreed to their own private agreement. The bonds paid Mrs. Gorman, I think 1.6 million for this. So, I can't fathom that they would have gotten more going to a judge in a criminal case. I can't imagine, or a civil case. I can't imagine they wouldn't have gotten that. But they paid 1.6 million to Mrs. Gorman. I'm asking for 210, 30 of that to go to assessment of Lake Beach.
And in terms of the state, what's it called, the Board of Pesticide
Control, yeah.
Control, is there a way that would be appropriate to try to influence their future assessment of fines, to write a letter to say, would that just be like as a concerned citizen to say, well, you guys should be assessing fines that can at least start to pay for, obviously there's research that needs to be done. We don't know, here they've applied this chemical that we don't even know very much about, and they're not even recovering their own costs of the time that it took them to do the whole thing probably. So
Agreed.
why,
And the
how do we
labs,
influence
Yeah.
that? Like, people tell us, you should find them as much as you possibly can. How can we
Yeah.
influence the Board of Pesticide Control?
I think
for the
I can
future?
look at the statute and then I can talk to the people I know at Department of Ag and see if there's a way we can lobby for increased penalties for things like this, and how to do that. I think that's at the legislative level, to be honest. Penalties are generally prescribed in law on what the fines are.
I think part of the thing here is the context in the state of Maine with agriculture and farmers who
You might want to have this a little closer.
farmers who are the
true.
ones who would be doing this. That's typically who they're looking at. And
So they're trying not to be too harsh on the farmers.
I suspect that there was consistency here with intentional application that happens all the time
Mhm.
in the agricultural context. This was different, of course. And I get your point about the way this was done. It's a very creepy thing, because I deal with violations all the time where people are intentionally cutting trees down, taking soil away, doing all kinds of things. This one's different because it wasn't with an excavator and it wasn't with a chainsaw and it wasn't with salt. But just for the board's sense of this, we have, as Jeremy said, what we have to work with our ordinance. And a consent agreement avoids court. And the reason you avoid court is because in this case, in my perspective, there isn't a better result to be obtained at court. So that's what makes this a sensible thing from my perspective. because of what we have for tools. We don't have all the tools that you would like. We have the tools we have.
Years ago, there was significant discussion about an ordinance that would have regulated the use of pesticides and herbicides in town. We have that Citizens for a Green Camden voluntary program where people put themselves on the map that I think is still in the town office. I got a couple emails from people saying, is this what it's going to take to get the town of Camden to finally act on that? You know, it might be, that was a Conservation Commission thing a little bit before. There's a lot of work that's been done in the past. It was just way before I was on the board, but urging the town to, I think, even language in an ordinance. So it might be worth.
It's a very
looking at
good
that.
point. I did, as part of my rebuttal to them, when they came back and said 30,000 was what they were going to offer us as a settlement, I went back and I dug through some of that old stuff, and I actually quoted some of the stuff to them in my rebuttal letter. And I think Bill said I think he's going to keep that one and maybe frame it. But it was a pretty good rebuttal back to them. And I was pretty sincere and pretty nasty and pretty forceful. And I think 180 is out of this world, to be honest with you, for a penalty like this. As egregious as it is, I mean, for the shoreline zoning, it's a pretty significant penalty.
I mean, we basically have to revise this ordinance, make it more punitive, because it's just, it is clearly unacceptable. And we don't have tools to go after them for more, or so maybe something to consider.
There is stuff about, we do have a policy about application of herbicides on town property.
We do.
So if it were to be found that it ended up on town property, that would.
That was discussed as part of the reason for this, because the town has such a history at this point, and the awareness and the programs and the map up front
Yeah.
in terms of where pesticides have been replaced with non-toxic ways to control weeds or whatever.
So we need a motion to approve this consent agreement.
Yep.
Conditioned upon payment.
Before we do, yes, I would like to open it for, but Chris, do you have anything you'd like to comment before we go? We'll come back to the board. Public comment on this? Anybody? Yes, please.
Just briefly, it sounds like you guys are handling this really well within the scope that you've discussed, but it does seem to me that beyond the discussion of trees and jurisdiction and use of pesticides, what have you, the select person raised the issue of damages and criminality, and I just wonder why, as a public safety issue, does that not step out of the things that we're discussing here, the regulations you're discussing? Is that something that raises us to potential criminality and damages that are not being discussed when you're discussing trees and land and zoning and what have you? Because it seems to me this may have moved into a public space and may have endangered the public. So something to think about.
Thank you, Chris. Ray, please.
Ray Andreessen, Cove Road, and I think backing up on that, my question is, this property is right close to Lake Beach, the park and the beach down below. And at the beach, you take a look at, you have kids playing there, dogs playing there. What happens if there is a spillage into there, or a drain, whatever you want to call it, a runoff into the beach, and you have dogs and kids getting sick? What is our recourse as a town?
Bill, what do you think? Can you answer Ray's and Chris's question? Similar damages?
Well, just think about if the town was in Mrs. Gorman's place. It's the same sort of way that it would be remedied. I mean, we don't have anything that we're aware of right now, so we don't have any scope of any damage. But there's no permission for anybody to damage the beach or the upland area there. And this testing will at least, importantly, give a baseline of, is there anything there now? Options are wide open for the future, but you have to have something that actually occurred. And that's how we then proceed, because we'd have two roles then. There may be, depending on what happens with vegetation, that possibly could be an issue under the shoreline zoning ordinance, but it's the town's property. And there would be all the remedies that every other private citizen has for damage to the town's property, if it does occur. but it hasn't yet. And it doesn't appear that it is going to with the buffer where nothing is dyed. Because this stuff, if you guys have seen photos, it certainly is effective quickly.
I got
Anything else from the public? Thank you. Stephanie?
Just a quick, so we've done testing at Lake Beach Water for other things.
For bacteria.
Bacteria.
Yeah.
There isn't anything that we wouldn't have, like, there isn't any data that is in there that we wouldn't be looking at, but we actually have it. You don't think there's anything?
No, definitely
that-
not.
Okay.
I will tell you that, I mean, when you brought it up about the state, when they went and tested this, and I met on site with the state, who was actually the Board of Pesticide Control staffer that was out there taking samples, and talked to him about possibility, like thinking about Lake Beach and all that. He didn't seem too concerned, to be honest with you, but those tests, they're not like, they don't send them to Augusta to have them tested.
Oh, okay.
They send them to, I think they went to a lab in Oregon or Montana. It's the only place that they can send them to. And so it's not a normal test. It's not something that we would just, when we're sampling bacteria, do they pick something up like that? They
Well, that's what
definitely
I
don't.
was, you get your blood test and you have like all these other things,
No,
but you're only
definitely not.
worried about these 3 items. So
Yeah.
that's what you're looking at.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's kind of,
No.
okay.
be good, but no.
I just say thank you for doing your job and getting it done. A lot of effort to put in to
I
getting
appreciate
that.
it.
I remember we talked about how much we're going to go ahead and try to get. And
Got it.
thank you for sticking to what we recommended and making it happen within the limits of what you had to work with.
Mhm. And I did get an email from CV Mahart today and said, are you guys, when do you want to move on this? And I told him that, the select board's approving this tonight. And so we'll move on it very quickly. So I suspect in the next couple of weeks, they'll be there.
Great.
And they'll drill monitoring wells. Is how they do that.
I'll make a
They do all
motion
the
if you want.
monitoring well stuff at the landfill, so.
So I'll make a motion that we approve the 210,000 as Jeremy has proposed, with 30,000 going towards the monitoring of Lake Beach.
And authorize the select board to sign on
Within
behalf
30
of you
days.
and paid within 30 days.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded.
As the manager. Yeah.
Yeah, the estimate is over the $30,000, right?
What's that?
The estimate is over the
The estimate is
$30,000?
$30,700 or $30,070, and they
700.
understand that they'll.
Can we, they have to cover, I mean, the
Yep.
town is not going to put a dollar
Yep.
in this.
Are they
So
going to
have
cover 30,700?
They're going to cover the cost of doing the monitoring, yes.
So $210,700.
Based on the consent agreement.
Yeah, I think what you need to do, to be honest with you, is stick with this agreement, and we will get that remaining money from them. Because if we go back to Mrs.
You
or the
could say-
bond's attorney,
$180,000 and then the cost of the testing.
Fine.
And if it's more expensive, then
Then it's more
Motion that
expensive.
we approve the consent agreement as Jeremy has presented, 180,000 plus
Cost of testing.
the cost of the testing. And you
authorize
wanted it to
authorize
be-
the town manager, Audra as the town manager, to sign the agreement, and that it's paid within 30 days.
Correct.
I'll still second it.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? 5-0. Jeremy, thank you for your work. Bill, thank you for your work.
Do we publish this in the papers? Sorry, I'm
There
sorry.
was an article in the paper today
Okay.
about it in the
Obviously,
Penn
yeah, there
Paper. Linda
was.
Clancy wrote something about it.
Good.
Yeah.
Let it be
I
known.
suspect there will be other papers picking it up.
Good.
To be honest, I don't recall ever, I've done this work for a long time, and this is the largest consent agreement that I've
Yep.
seen for
would you
something
like us to do a press release?
We
Yeah,
can
yeah.
make a statement.
That we can
about
do a
it.
press release.
Newsletter out of it.
We begrudgingly
Item-
accepted the consent agreement.
Item 8A on tonight's agenda is the update of the Knox County Regional Communications Center
Mm.
and Knox County departments. Do we have? Two Knox County commissioners, if you'd introduce yourselves, please. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks for inviting us here tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and talk about the county, communications, and how the county works in our departments. My name is Sharon Pullman. I am one of 3 Knox County Commissioners representing Camden, Rockport, Hope, Owl's Head, North Haven, Vinyl Haven, Matinicus, North Haven, Vinyl Haven, Matinicus, did I say Idaho, Cree Haven Islands, and Muscle Ridge Islands as well. My fellow commissioner here tonight, there are 3 of us in total. We each serve 4-year terms. Collectively, the 3 of us represent all 18 towns and municipalities in Knox County. Chair Ed Glazer is District 1, and he represents Rockland, St. George, South Thomaston, and Thomaston. Our 3rd representative is Richard Parent. He represents Appleton, Cushing, Friendship, Union, Warren, and Washington. And the departments that, would you like me to just kind of start? What I was thinking is just do an overview of all the departments, and then we can get into specifically the communications. Would that be all right?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks. So first, I would also like to thank all of our towns and municipalities, police, fire, EMS, EMA, and everybody for working with us on the issues that we're facing with our communications department. To back up, though, the departments that we have responsibility for are the Sheriff's Department, Corrections, Communications, EMA, which is Emergency Management Agency, the District Attorney, the Airport, Probate, Deeds, Finance, IT, and Administration for the county. We work collectively with an elected or an appointed budget committee to come to our budgets each year. The budget committee is comprised of 9 members, collectively representing all of the towns and municipalities in Knox County. Camden's representative was late being elected or appointed, but he joined us in June, I believe it was. Peter Lindquist has joined us. So we work jointly together, starting back in probably April with preliminary budget reviews, anticipating unexpected costs or large expenditures. And then we move through another preliminary meeting. And right now, we just had our first joint meeting of the Budget Committee and Commission to review this year's budget. And tomorrow night, we have another meeting, and we review line item by line item each of the department's budgets. And then the commission has worked in previous to that with each of the departments to come up to the budget that we then present to the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee can question, and they can either approve the budget in totality, make recommendations for cuts, but in the end, if they have the majority, the budget that they vote for will override any budget that the commission might have brought forth. So in past, we have always agreed. We've always come to consensus on the budget. Last year was an unusual year, and we're hoping to not have a repeat of that, because past decisions of which the county commissioners take full responsibility for the departments that are struggling today. But past decisions have led us to the point of where we are today with budget struggles, and why our departments, 4 in particular, and I'll get back to communications because that's what led us here to begin with. But 4 of our departments that are comprise the core of our public safety departments and provide services to the towns, municipalities, and all of our citizens, are suffering severe shortages. The sheriff's department lost 5 deputies in 2 weeks to neighboring towns, primarily because of wages. Unfortunately, we're in competition with our neighboring towns, which moving forward, we hope we can all come together, and rather than one town taking from another, the county or whatever it might be, we can work more collaboratively together to provide the public safety that we all need. Sheriff's Department's down 5 deputies. The only way we can really address that is to be competitive in wages. And so we're looking at huge increases in the Sheriff's Department this year. The same thing with corrections. We were down 50% of our staff. We will almost have to shut down if we go much below that. We are mandated by the state to have a certain number of individuals on staff at all times. When we can't provide that, we have to then send inmates to the Twin Bridges or other neighboring jails, which costs the county and every taxpayer more money. Again, the way that we have been addressing it is through dramatic increases in wages, which had we been moving along that path for a period of years, we might have been able to stave that off. There's a lot of reasons why that didn't happen, but that's where we are. So we're working on that. Our EMA department has been doing a tremendous amount of work. I'm happy to talk about all of that. The collaborative work, our EMA director works directly with all towns, EMA directors, and does trainings, is involved in major responses. When we had the hurricane, they opened up an emergency operations center, and they work with everybody to make sure that all the towns, municipalities are getting the services and the coverage and the responders to the places where they need to be. They are short-staffed as well. The biggest department that we've seen was the near failure, or depending on how you look at it, the failure of our communications center 911 dispatch. And it reached a critical point a few months ago, Ed, right? Reached a critical point when, for, again, many reasons, it was not the commissions was not necessarily appraised as soon as perhaps we should have been. But in any case, we ended up in a situation where we were almost down to 2 dispatchers. We can't operate on that. Again, goes back to that situation was a failure, honestly, of some management oversight, failed union negotiations, and in large part, not having competitive wages. That being said, we're not unique. Every town in the state and across the country is having difficulty recruiting and retaining their public service personnel who provide the backbone of all of our public safety for all of us. The last department where we're short, we have 1 IT director for the entire county, and he's now the bridge between Knox County and Waldo County, who have agreed, and we are paying them out of the funds that we had in our communications budget, but we were not able to fill the position. So we're using money from that to pay Waldo County to cover our 911 services until such time that we can get staff back up. And our goal, one could be to reestablish our public safety status where we do dispatch and 911. The complexity in that is the training is there's a lot of training involved for the dispatch, more so maybe than the 911. You get the call, 911 dispatches the call out, but the trainings are different. And So we are open to any suggestions. We want to and need and have been working with the towns. There is also the Knox Regional Communications Committee, comprised of 8 members of fire. I believe Chief Peasley is on that board, right, Ed? And James Moore from Rockport is also on that board. It's comprised of 8 members made up of fire, police, EMA, and emergency services. And they're kind of an advisory committee to the communications department. We are, Ed in particular, and Ed's here tonight to speak specifically to the communications piece because he's been the point person. He's attending all the meetings. Thank you, Ed, for all, as the commission representative. He's working very closely with our sheriff, who has temporarily taken on the leadership of the communications center while we look for an interim director to bring on board to address other issues. We're working with the towns. We're open to all suggestions. Our goal is to, however it comes to be, provide the public safety that our towns and municipalities pay for and all of our citizens expect. So if I may.
Hello again. Just to fill you in on a couple of details of what's going on.
Ed, could you just introduce yourself,
Oh,
please?
Ed
Just-
Glazer,
Thank you.
Chair of the Knox County Commission and representative of District 1. I'll start by saying I went to an open house. As you know, most of the towns in the county for firefighting and EMS have a mutual aid association, and they have a training facility in St. George. And they had an open house last weekend, and I went there specifically to ask all of the different first responders how they felt that the communication center was working. And everybody said it's as good as it can be, considering we don't have complete control over the system. Because Waldo County is answering the 911 calls, we basically lose a little bit of information. Dispatching is good, but it's not as good as it can be. But everybody said it's working. It's not like there are big gaps at the moment. So as far as that part goes, we're at a sort of a standstill. We have to go the next step now, and that's what we're working on. A couple of weeks ago, we met with the PUC. PUC is in charge of 911, and they're willing to give us about a year to get back to where we need to be. We have about, I don't know the exact number because we're in the process of hiring people. We have about 8 full-time employees, about 4 of whom have their certifications, and the other 4 are in training. We have per diem people that all have their training. I'm not exactly sure, and this is something I just asked the director to give us the information on how the shifts are working out, how many hours somebody has to work, what we're doing on that, and I'll get that information to you as soon as we get it. But I think what happens is, unless we do a few more things like get an interim director, we're in the process of hiring a consulting firm to look at the way we do it and how other towns do it and other states do it, to see if there's some better way of doing it than the structure that we've got. But we need to hire more people, and part of that is having somebody who's a director, getting a new union contract in place, and then the next step is really just in terms of how do you hire people. We've hired people on an emergency basis to get bodies in, and we're changing that. We're going to put in an orals board, which is made up out of the executive committee, as well as we need a representative from at least one town. I think we sent out a mailing to the different towns asking if there's somebody who'd like to serve on this board. I don't know if it got down to the select board level, but we need somebody who represents the towns on this hiring committee, because we need as much input as to the kind of people we want to hire as possible. So we're at that point, we're no longer in an emergency situation, but we've got to figure out what our long-term situation is going to be. I do want to touch on a couple of other things about the county that are really pretty exciting and pretty fun. The airport, as you know, the airport got a fair amount of federal funding over the last couple of years, and we're putting in a solar farm, not as big as we had originally hoped, but a solar farm. And with that, we've gotten another grant for an electric charging station, both for vehicles and for airplanes. And we're in the process of, I guess, Penobscot Air is working with UPS, and we expect to have some electric airplanes as soon as next year, running out of the airport, going to the islands, which should cut down on the noise and should cut down on pollution. So we're pretty excited about that. And that'll be, the electricity will be purely solar powered. So that's a pretty exciting thing as far as I'm concerned. Sure.
Sharon, can you come up? Thank you.
So, yeah, that's the good news. I give you all the bad news. I get to give you all the good news. We're really proud of that. And I'd like to just recognize Tom Hedstrom's company was awarded the contract. You'll be working with us on the installation of those electric charging stations out at the airport. And we got a $294,000 grant. And the governor was, you know, we're like the first airport in Maine to do this. So as I just wanted to tag on, we're very excited.
Yeah, so that's a good thing. We're also in the process of looking at the charter, the county's charter. A couple of things we want to do, at least as far as I'm concerned, is we only have 3 commissioners. I really think we need 5 commissioners, partly to represent the county better. As you can see, the districts that Sharon has is sort of broken up. She's got the islands as well as Rockport and Camden, and then an inland town. It would be better by having 5 commissioners to have somebody who probably represents more of the fishing communities and somebody else who represents more of the metropolitan communities, someone who represents more of the farming communities, so that input gets back to the county rather than us trying to represent everybody. So we're working on that on the charter. I think one of the other things that the Charter Committee is excited about is getting rid of parties for elections. We'd like to go to a nonpartisan election format so that parties don't enter into it. And then a lot of the other stuff is technical stuff that we'll be working on, changing the titles. The charter is 14 years old, and by going back to the original charter and changing the names of positions, I think we'll be closer to what we really have. So I think those kinds of things are going on that are different than just the normal day-to-day stuff that we do. And I guess it's really up to you guys to ask questions, if you have any.
Stephanie?
So you said you want to go to 5. If we had 5 commissioners, would there be better oversight so that a breakdown that we just saw wouldn't be, or that you would see that the breakdown was
You
going to happen?
touched on something that's very important. When you have 3 select board members, you can't talk to each other because you're an official meeting, but 2 can. You know, if you want to find out where things are going, how things are going, we have 3 commissioners. 2 people can't even talk to each other to discuss how things are going. Did you like the way that you got this information? Are you getting all the information? We can't do that except in a public forum. And a public forum makes it a little hard because when you have an agenda, you're supposed to discuss what's on the agenda. You're not supposed to just have a rambling conversation. So by having 5, I really do think it improves governance, because then we can start talking to each other and saying, you know, I really didn't like what happened.
Yeah. My part B to that is you're still just basically a like advisory board to your managers by the sounds.
The fewer members we have, the more we're advisory. When you start getting more members, then all of a sudden you start, it is a power shift, to be honest. It is a power shift. When you two commissioners can talk to each other, all of a sudden they grab some of that power back as opposed to sort of being in the background. So you're right. It is an attempt, don't tell anybody, it is an attempt
I
to
think
give a
it
little bit
needs
more
to.
power to the commissioners. I think we made a mistake when we wrote the charter 14 years ago, because we only had 3 commissioners back when we first started. And we said, well, who needs more commissioners? I think we've realized we do need more commissioners. There are almost no towns in Knox County. There's a couple that only have 3 select board members. Almost all the others, I think even Isla Ho with 76 residents has 5 members on their select board.
Yes, Stephanie, I'll just say, add in, Ed's new this year, so he got kind of trial by fire here, but he's doing great and he's our chair. I'm in my second term, and Stephanie, to your point, it's incredibly difficult and to have any kind of conversations or find out things that we should be aware of or weren't aware of, or should be of concern or so forth, when we can't talk to each other. So to your point, would having 5 provide better governance? And yes, absolutely. It possibly could have prevented, to some degree, where we are today, had we been able to talk to each other more freely. And even Ed and I being here tonight is technically a violation. He can't hear out of one side of his ear anywhere. So I'm sitting next to that side. So, but yeah, so there's, we're dealing with a charter that was, is what, 10, 14 years old. Ed is taking the lead on that, and very happily we're revising that, and we are looking at every aspect of our department, our administration, how we're structured, how information does or does not flow, how we're interacting or not interacting with our towns and municipalities. It's really not been until very recently that we have in the county, I think, shifted to more of a collaborative mindset, and looking at regionalization in many areas, and reaching out to, whether it's, EMS, Chris, you were talking about, and Stephanie, ambulance services and so forth. I think there are a lot of opportunities, and Ed, as the newest member, we're excited and look forward to the opportunity to work together as partners, because everything's getting difficult for everybody to do alone. And so we look forward to that opportunity. Thanks.
Allison?
I remember looking at that charter years ago when something bothered me and I wanted to try to influence something, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is just so restrictive, really. And even the way the budget committee works, that hasn't always been. It's often an afterthought for the towns who they're going to send as the budget committee representative, and then you find the budget committee there has a lot more power than we're used to here. So it's hard to follow, I think for the average citizen, for the average select board member, it's hard to follow along, and everybody just runs out of time. I'm wondering, in the interim, as you're looking at the charter and before you actually can make changes, because I know that takes a long time, like everything, you can have executives. I can see this 3-person thing being a problem. Are you in the habit of having executive sessions maybe more often, so that you guys can talk about performance reviews and things that might not be appropriate to kind of hash out in public?
Yeah, we're going to have, as a matter of fact, I think Monday, we're going to have an executive session just for that purpose. But you guys know, because you're in the public eye, executive sessions are frowned on because you lack that transparency to some extent. Everybody says, well, what's going on behind the closed doors? What are they doing? And there is certainly, even within that, there are rules about what you're allowed to do. We do need to have more of them. We need to work in that direction, but it's at the expense of the vision of transparency at the same time.
I mean, ultimately, I would be like performance reviews, because just like us, our ultimate job is to decide whether the town manager is performing appropriately and to do that, review however is appropriate, because it really shouldn't be us running around being like, hey, this week I'm going to watch this and Chris is going to watch next week. And it should be the professional
We are
managers.
working through that process, certainly over the next 6 months, especially with the county administration. We're working on that. I believe we're also going to hire somebody to look at the organization and give us some ideas if there's better ways to organize, to be set up than we are now. What you touched on in terms of the budget committee is left over from state law. When we adopted the charter, we basically took the state law on budget committees and just folded it in there for counties. And we're making a few changes to it that hopefully gets the budget committee more involved in the process from the very beginning. Because I think the budget committee, as much as the commissioners, represent the citizens, and we need their input.
I wonder something, you can either go that direction, or many towns are going the direction of getting rid of their budget committees and saying, okay, it's hard enough to figure out who can, just to research, the county, who's am I going to vote for county commissioner? Then you kind of want to be able to maybe hold that person accountable and have them have the authority if they're going to be.
I suspect, I may be wrong, I may be reading the electorate wrong, but the charter committee is making these proposed amendments. It'll get approved by the commission, and then it goes to the voters. And I suspect we'd have a hard time getting something approved that got rid of a budget committee. I might be wrong,
I don't
but
know
I
if
think that
anybody's
would be
paying
a
very close
hard,
attention. I think you guys should recommend what you think is best.
yeah.
Maybe a professional reviewer. I really like the idea of having a professional come and review and say, these are the models that work better in
Right.
these types of circumstances.
I don't know of
because
any county that doesn't have a budget committee, though there are some that it's more advisory and less have say.
That might
Yeah.
be smart.
Sophie?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is very interesting, and I'm happy to learn more about the commission. A couple of questions for you. In the process of revising the charter, are you going to be receiving public comments and invite the public to comment? I remember a couple instances where the public made the trip. And yeah, you remember that day too very well. But I think it would be really nice if the public had a chance to make comments and be invited back in a dialogue with the commission, and if they could better understand what the commission does for the towns, especially in light of an increasing budget that is not, everybody's aware of it. And especially in Camden, when we're one of the largest contributors to the commission's budget. So the more engagement with the public, I think would be interesting, especially to understand what are you guys doing, which is, a bit esoteric.
I think you're touching on something else about public participation in everything that the county does. We have a few committees that there's, the airport has an advisory committee that's made up out of citizens from all of the towns. We also, the budget committee serves that same purpose, but we really need to have more public hearings, but people need to know about the public hearings. One of the problems we have is our public meetings most of the county meetings are during the day. That's how most committee meetings are. And we have to change that. We have to find a way to start having meetings, especially public meetings, in the afternoon or the evening when more people can attend. It's all fine and well to say, oh, nobody comes to our meetings, why would we have another one? But maybe we have to change the time so that people can come to the meetings. Just like an evening meeting, people will always say, well, I can't go to an evening meeting because I've got children at home. But it's more likely that they can come rather than the fact that they have to work during the day. So I think we need to spread it around and have different kinds of chances for people to have public meetings. We will have a series of public meetings and informational meetings on the charter when we get to that point. There will be certainly a public hearing before the county approves it, and there'll be probably public hearings throughout the county for us to propose this to different towns so people have some idea what they're voting on when it goes to the polls. But yeah, but I think really that's the biggest issue right there, is getting public involvement and public knowledge out there of what we have. Almost everybody has that problem.
Yeah.
Every town has that problem. Every county has that problem. Who wants to spend money on like a public relations department in your town or your county? You know, it's a waste of money. Well, it isn't a waste of money. We can't, but we also can't just rely on the press to get the word out there. So we have to, you're absolutely right. We have failed at that in the past, and we'll probably continue to fail at that, but we have to work at it.
Thank you.
Chris, do you have anything? No. I have two
Sure.
short questions. Do you have any timing or timelines for getting 911 calls back to Knox County?
I think we are contracted with Waldo County. I think we're, into the third month now. We contracted with them for 6 months. And I think we've discussed with them that the reality is it's going to be about a year. And PUC has, when we met with them, they said, we'll give you up to a year.
Okay.
So that's about what we're looking at, is hopefully, in the next 9 months, we'll have figured this all out between having a consultant, a temporary department head, getting through the union part, getting some new hirees. Some of the people who are currently per diem people who are fully certified say if we work through these issues, they're willing to come and work full time.
So 9 months also for a new director. That was my other question, or department head, interim or permanent.
We're going to start with the interim because we need somebody who can just do it's not the normal job, because it requires a lot more working with the state. It requires a lot more filling in these details, working with Waldo County. We just need somebody who's willing to do a lot more phone calling. Once we get, it doesn't even have to be somebody who knows everything there is to know about how to dispatch. It has to be somebody who knows how to create an organization and create Audra can talk about this more than anybody else. When you have an organization, there's a culture that makes it work or doesn't make it work. And I think the culture at the communication center has been terrible in terms of personality conflicts, in terms of some of that is supervision. Some of that is just how do you bring in that kind of culture? And we need somebody who's got that kind of experience to come in and start talking about that. And that's where we're talking about a year to get going where we want to be.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Board, anything else?
You said you had another question too.
No, that was it. It was the 911 and the director.
Oh,
Yep.
Okay.
I just have a really
Allison?
quick one. Is there a quick number that, obviously 911 is the emergency number, but for a non-emergency, I've been told so many numbers over the years. I used to always call 236-3030 back when Camden had it, and that was easy to remember. But if I want to call and report something that's not an emergency, I need something easy to remember.
Well, it touches on two other things. One is memory. I can't even remember my own cell phone number. So you're asking me to tell you what that number, there is a number, I don't know what it is, but I'll get it to you, and we should publish it more.
And could it be an easy one?
I don't know that we have that choice anymore.
That's why they came up. Phone numbers online and
That's
forward
why
them.
they came up with 911, because it was easy.
How
But
about
the other
211?
half of that is, I think we've said this, you brought this up, our 911 director brings this up, is if you accidentally call 911 and you think, oh, this isn't a very serious call, stay on the phone until the operator gets an opportunity to get your information. Because if they don't, they have to, by federal law, try to track down that phone call. So they spend time trying to call it back and figure out what's wrong. Or because phones have GPS, they may even dispatch EMS, EMTs to that site where the phone is to try to find out if this is a real emergency that somebody was cut off.
Well,
So
I
if
had
you-
an experience with that the other night, and I can tell you they did not come, and it was really concerning, and I wish they had, but
Yeah,
I think that's the least of our.
but so if you call 911, don't hang up. Continue the call to the end, and it'll save us all time and effort and money.
Okay, but I still would
But
echo
you would
my
like to have a
request
nice,
for
easy phone
one to,
call.
because there's all kinds of things. It's not just 911. We've been instructed for years by our police departments to call dispatch to report, sidewalk parking, dangerous dog, all of the things that our dispatch used to handle. And I feel constantly uncomfortable calling that number because I don't know that I'm doing the right thing. And if there was an easy one to be able to tell people.
And it's the same people. When you call, well, now it isn't because you're calling Waldo.
No, then
But-
now I really don't do it because
Yeah.
you're calling Waldo and you feel like you're.
Right.
It would be good to
I'll
know.
get that phone number out there
There
and we'll
should
try
be
to
211.
publicize it
Do
better.
we have any questions or comments from the public, people? And please come forward.
And while Steve comes up,
Come on, Captain.
and while Steve comes up, it would be nice to have regular, keep us posted. I mean, like, I'm sure everything will be public on when the new charter amendments are everything, but we're happy also to relate the messages from the select board here. So make sure that people are aware of it and, but keep us in the loop because this is very interesting. And thank you so much for making the time to come and visit with us.
Well, for the Charter Commission, who could people reach out to if they want to participate? Who's the person to get? Ed?
Sure.
Great.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, we'll send you, if you haven't gotten them, we'll send you the current status of the Charter Committee. I think what we've done is now in front of legal counsel, looking at it and saying, oh, yeah, this has been tried in other counties and it's way illegal. I mean, that kind of thing. Or they may say, yeah, this is perfectly fine. So that's what we're looking at now in terms of what they're saying. Is this a question for me?
No,
You're done.
well, maybe. Admitting that I haven't studied this issue, I
Steve,
just
could
read
you-
in the paper,
Could you introduce yourself?
Stephen Gold, Grove Street,
Thank you.
that the county budget is up 21%. And having just heard about the hiring crisis for the county, my question is this proposed budget just sort of giving raises to existing people, or is it anticipating future hires?
Both. Both. I mean, part of what you have to do is retain people if you've got them. And so you pay them more. And part of it is how do you attract new people and you pay them more. There's other parts to it. I think we've discussed this before. If you start losing people, you start losing people's being able to take time off. And if people can't take time off because they're required to work, they're not going to be happy. And so then you start getting dissatisfaction at the same time, and no amount of money makes up for that. So there's also,
I understand that, Ed. All I'm asking
It's-
is the 21%, if you have to hire 20% more people, is the increase going to be significantly more than that?
all of our budgets in the past were based on, if you have a department that's supposed to have 20 employees, paying 20 employees. And so some of that is increase in that case for those people that you already have, as well as then adding the money for the rest of the people that you need. When you don't have enough employees, you start paying more for overtime too. And so hopefully at the other end, it cuts down on the overtime part of the budget.
Ed and Sharon, thank you so much for coming. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Good update.
Hopefully keep this conversation going. This is not like the only time we're ever going to be here. Hopefully you'll have time for us to come again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, it's good to see positive direction. Thank you.
Thank you for violating your rules for us.
Item 8B, update on planning board recommendations to amend zoning code, piers, wharfs, land attached floats, and breakwaters. Chair.
Hi, thank you. I guess I'm going to go back to where we started, and I was just trying to track down when we approved this moratorium originally, and it was the election in June of 2022, but it was retroactive to March. And, we have, you guys approved a third extension, 180-day extension in July 28th. And in order to approve an extension, you have to find that you're making substantial progress. And substantial progress means you actually have to do something. And just going back to, I went back to try to, when did we start doing things with this? The select board held a meeting July 21st, 2022, the day before my birthday. So I remember being here for that day. And it was a joint meeting between the select board, harbor committee, and the planning board. And not all of you were on the board then, but I kind of gave an overview, and I did look at the memo that I produced about the process, about moratoriums and what has to happen. And it's about progress. And at that meeting, the planning board chair that was there, the harbor committee chair was there, and the select board, for the most part, gave direction, albeit not a whole lot of direction, to be honest with you. And the harbor committee then delved into looking at the recommendation or the moratorium, and then they came up with a report and recommendations. In order to do anything with piers, you have two ordinances that regulate them. There's the Chapter 108, which is the harbor and waterways, and there's Chapter 290 zoning. They have to align. They have to work together. They can't have, one can't have certain standards and the other one have different standards. So they need to align. So when the harbor committee released their report, the select board, I even went back and looked at how you accepted that report. And I know it wasn't all of you here, but it was I think it was just an acceptance of the report. And then I was, for the most part, since there was not a lot of direction other than understanding that we have a moratorium and we need to keep this thing going and making progress, I took that report, drafted ordinance amendments for Chapter 108 and Chapter 290 that took the harbor committee's recommendations and melded them together so that they were consistent. And looking at dates, then at some point in March of 2023, it was decided not to move those recommendations to voters in June of 2023. And meanwhile, we still have to keep this project going and this process going, and which means making progress. So the planning board, again, had in their process during their hearings, because they have a public hearing process, the harbor committee doesn't. The planning board had a public hearing. They were all on board with moving the harbor committee's recommendations forward, and they had a hearing on it. They moved those forward 5-0. At that meeting, though, there was concern raised by the Conservation Commission and others about whether or not the review was thorough enough at the harbor committee level. And the planning board has their own authority. They have their own ability to weigh in on these things that are ordinance amendments. They just kind of kept talking about this at the workshop level. And then in June of this year, the select board and the planning board had a joint workshop. And at that workshop, we discussed two things: short-term rentals, and the very tail end of it was piers and where should we go. And at that meeting, and there's a memo that I had prepared for you, that the planning board was looking at the possibility of actually prohibiting new piers in the outer and coastal harbor. And they have kind of betted that back and forth. Now they are ready to move forward with amendments that would prohibit new piers in the outer and coastal harbor. One of the issues that I saw in advising them and guiding them through their work was that the moratorium dealt with piers and other structures. And so the Harbor Committee spent a lot of time, and I sat in on most all those meetings with the Harbor Committee, spent a lot of time on piers, but they didn't really spend much time at all on these other things like bulkheads, breakwaters, marine railways, and wharfs, all things that are allowed currently. And so the planning board had a workshop and talked about this issue, and they talked about each one of these other structures because they are regulated by that moratorium. And they felt in their process that we should prohibit those as well. However, bulkheads are, and I provided you in the memo what the definition of them are. They felt that prohibiting bulkheads might not be a great thing, especially if there was a catastrophic situation or a catastrophic erosion issue, or there was a case where a house might be very close to the edge of the ocean, and a riprap bank, which is normally done to address erosion, wouldn't work. So they kind of tasked me with looking at a definition that would allow residential bulkheads to stay allowed, only to address catastrophic or emergency scenarios. So that's where the planning board is. I had reached out to Josh Moore about this issue. He's the chair of the Harbor Committee. And I think his response was that that the committee did their work and they felt that they didn't really need to address that issue. The planning board does though, and they felt like they need to move this forward. And that's where we are. And I just bring that up again because we have a moratorium that we're working with. And I know voters approved, what they approved yesterday. And that only applied to land attached floats and existing piers and rebuilds of existing ones. So the moratorium is still in place. That moratorium was approved by you folks, an extension. That would be the third extension on July 28th. So that's going to expire January, February time, if I did my math correct. So we need to have a plan moving forward because we can't just not do something. If you want to let it lapse, we could let it lapse. But by extending it like you did, that assumes and says that we're making substantial progress moving forward. And the only way to do that is by doing some of this work. That's where the planning board is now. That's why I wanted to bring this update to you, because it is November, and come January, February, you're going to be asked to extend it again or not. And that's where we are. That's my update. I'm here to answer any questions on it. I will say, going back to the initial discussion with the chair of the Harbor Committee and the chair of the Planning Board back on July 21st, 2022, it was discussed that there may be other committees like the Conservation Committee or Commission and others that may want to chime in and have some say or provide some context or some thoughts on this. And I believe the Conservation Commission has done that some, because they did provide comments to the Planning Board when we had hearings initially back in March of last year. And I think they even came to you folks when you had to extend the moratorium again. So that's where we are. I just wanted to provide that update to you. There's no action needed, but it's important to keep this thing going. And without updating you, I feel like it's a failure on my part to keep this thing going. So that's why I'm here. Love your direction. I mean, keep in mind that any change that is done to Chapter 108, that goes through you folks through a public hearing process. That's the Harbor and Waterways. Changes to the Chapter 290, which is the zoning ordinance, that starts with the Planning Board. They have a public hearing that they hold, then they vote on it, and then they make a recommendation to the Select Board. Generally, their recommendations are that you approve them and send them to voters for a vote. It's happened in the past where Planning board has made a recommendation on something and they've got it into the select board and the select board killed it and it died. So I'm just throwing that out there. And I think that's what happened initially back in 2014 or 2015. The Harbor Committee spent a lot of time on this very issue and made some recommendations to prohibit them in the harbor. And then the select board, it died at the select board level and never went to voters. I don't want, I just want to be transparent to where the planning board is because we're moving this forward because someone has to. And that's where we are. Any questions or comments?
Yeah.
So
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the update and taking me back in time.
It took me back in time. I was up last night going back and watching videos. So,
well, thank you for doing that because I didn't do it. I have a couple of questions on the process. So the
Yep.
first one, I think, even though the Harbor Committee did not look at bulkheads, water breakwaters, and
yep.
all those four, I think it would be good policy or process steps to maybe have a joint workshop between the planning board and the Harbor Committee on those issues. I think they would welcome it, actually, to have the possibility to talk together.
do.
I would completely help, and support that. I think it's a
Yeah.
good idea because they haven't spoken together, as you just mentioned, for at least a year and a half, if not two. So let's make that happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the planning board initially, they were very cognizant of their role, right? They didn't want to step into something that the select board said, Harbor Committee, you guys start this. Everyone knew that the planning board had to take it up at some point. But initially they were letting the Harbor Committee just handle it. So I appreciate that and I'll make that happen.
And I understand better that these are two very different committees with two very different processes. The second question I have is on banning the piers.
Is on what?
On the ban.
Uh-huh.
Because I don't remember, so my own interpretation was that the select board should have directed the planning board or the Harbor Committee to examine what banning the piers meant. And I don't recall that we made that decision. So that's one of my questions, but bear with me. Because I think it's a question worthy of examining. And I would love to have an opinion from the Harbor Committee and the planning board together. What does it mean to ban piers? Does it mean that the piers that are already existing are grandfathered? Can we look at an idea of the tax implication of not having piers? Is tax revenue, are we losing tax revenue? Whatever it is, so that we understand the consequences of that decision as well, so that we do our due diligence and make sure that what we propose to the voters, whatever it is, there's some research and they can look it up as well. They can participate in that process. So these were my two questions / concerns, and how can we make that happen to have, I think, a better process with the planning board and the Harbor Committee. And the Conservation Committee came to the Harbor Committee, by the way, also to share their recommendations. So
Yeah. I guess the one easy answer is piers and structures that are already in place would be grandfathered and are in and allowed to stay. And what the voters approved yesterday allows people to maintain them and rebuild them to certain standards. Does not allow new ones to be built. The planning board spent a lot of time, and I get it. When they dove in it, they were initially saying, okay, we got to move this thing along because we're under this moratorium. And this was before we've extended it, a second time and a third time. They were just like moving forward with the direction of getting the changes to voters that the Harbor Committee recommended. And then during that process, because they have their own authority, they have their own review process to develop ordinance amendments. They looked at it and I guess, and just going back to some memos that I wrote to you folks, the Harbor Committee doesn't have a hearing. There's no public hearing, process.
there's no public hearing process, but all the meetings are public.
Correct.
And
I get
invited
it.
the public,
I get
the
that.
planning board meeting as well. So I think we can find better collaboration there, probably.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to say is in their formal role of holding a public hearing on proposed ordinance amendments, they heard public comment in that public hearing that gave them a pause about just letting the amendments move forward. Even though they wanted to, they did move them forward. it made them think that, maybe we really need to look at this differently and look at the impacts both ecologically to the harbor and to public access and those things. And that's why they came up, and aesthetics and the view and all of that. I've heard that from a lot of people, to be honest with you. I've heard people call them porcupine coasts, and it never dawned on me, but when you have lots of piers sticking out along your coast, it's an aesthetic issue, can be an aesthetic issue. And I think that's where one of the issues that the planning board had. But certainly getting back to a joint meeting that makes sense, and we can do that. I'm not sure it's going to change anything in the planning board's direction, but certainly having that process together makes sense to me, and I'll do that. I'll make that happen.
Yep, great.
Yeah.
And looking at those things and documenting a little bit more what banning would entail, just so that, because so many times something comes to the select board and we're saying, oh, banning we just ban it. And then more questions arise and we haven't looked at them ahead of time. So let's do that this time. I don't mean to stop the process or anything. I'm actually asking to compact the process.
Yeah, no, we need to, because we're going to be back in
totally
January,
I
February saying, do
completely
we
get
want to
it.
extend it?
But I think it would be good form and good process to have collaboration between those two bodies.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Allison?
Having watched this conversation unfold since at least 2014 and 15, and read extensive articles and public hearings, and Steve Gold could tell you it's been discussed many times before, and almost gotten to the voters and then not. I think one of the problems with these peer applications is that it does take a significant amount of time from boards and town staff that really should be working on more pressing matters for the town. And so when you look at all the things that are before the planning board and the select board and the different committees, to have one more meeting to make sure that we're not going to damage before we take the step of just asking voters if they would like to prohibit new piers. I feel like it's taking up a lot of time that should be spent on other things, and that the planning board did go through a lengthy process, and that maybe we should all just embrace the planning board public hearing process and then the eventual select board public hearing process. If voters say no, that they do not want to prohibit new piers, then we can go to that more extensive discussion, because that's the signal that they're going to be saying, no, we want you to let some more of this happen. But I just would question the wisdom of having more joint workshops. Ultimately, the question is, do we feel comfortable giving away more public space? That's because that's what every peer application is. It's permission to place something permanently in the public right of way. And I think that we just shouldn't, we're at the point where we should just ask voters, and we've already talked about it a lot. But I would also, if we are going to have more meetings about it, I think that it should be the Conservation Commission. Yes, if we're going to talk about it more, there are people that think we should be trying to get rid of the existing piers. There are people that think we shouldn't allow any more seawalls at all. So if we're going to open it up to that discussion to rehash it with the Harbor Committee, then we should do it, I guess, and we should expand it to these other things where the Conservation Commission and other groups might also want to be involved. I think it's just a can of worms a little bit.
I don't think it's necessarily a can of worms. I think what I was trying to do with the planning board was, we spent so much time in the Harbor Committee, spent so much time on piers, but this applies to and other structures, and all these other structures weren't really discussed at the Harbor Committee level. And these are like the breakwater or the bulkhead that you mentioned, the wall, seawall, that would be a bulkhead. And that's why I asked the planning board to say, okay, well, what about these other structures? And I think the way to do it would be probably go back to the Harbor. I think it's appropriate to bring something back to the Harbor Committee with a planning board and say, okay, what about these other structures? You've said so much about, you came up with your report on piers, but what about these? And the planning board has already stated where they feel they are on those.
I think you guys have come up with something very reasonable. There are people that what you're proposing is a compromise. Some people would say no new structures. Some people would say as many more structures as you want. I just don't think it's just a harbor. If you're gonna go into that, I think you should open it up to the Conservation Commission too, because every new bulkhead, every new wharf, all of that is also occupying public space. It has ecological impacts. I don't think we've ever clearly defined what is a harbor committee thing, what is a conservation commission thing, what is a general public interest thing. The Historic Resources Committee might also, the historic views. Really, it's a matter that touches on every area. It's not just specific to a single committee. I wouldn't
So
think
I guess what I would do is then I would invite the folks from the Conservation Commission to be involved in that process. And any meeting that the planning board has moving forward, I will copy the Conservation Commission and include them and the Harbor Committee. I mean, I think that's probably the way. I mean, I'm going to reach out to Josh and Ethan tomorrow, the chairs of both the Harbor and the Planning Board, and say we need to sit down and go over this again, looking at these other structures. The Planning Board has their feeling. They're not going to change, to be honest with you. I don't think the Planning Board's going to alter their view of where they're at. But
where the whole state is going. What they've come up with is very reasonable. It's what the whole rest of the state is doing.
I don't know what you mean that what they came up with reasonable. I mean, what they want to do is they want to prohibit any new structures, including piers in the outer and coastal, except for bulkheads that may need to be constructed for the purposes of addressing a catastrophic failure, whether that be land or catastrophic issue
Right.
to a building. That's their
You can't construct any new seawalls in southern Maine.
in southern Maine.
Right.
Yep.
So it
Makes sense
Okay.
to move it here, but
Public comment?
sure, no problem. I mean, all these meetings are open to the public,
Anybody can
all of
come.
them. So sure.
I'll tell Audra right now that I want to go.
Okay.
A town party.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Does that make
Thank you for the
sense?
update.
Thank you.
Okay.
The last item on tonight's agenda before adjournment, of course, is item 8C, tannery redevelopment as public open space. Audra, could you give us the background on that?
Yeah, so just to briefly go over this. So the discussion tonight that was brought forward is, redevelopment of the tannery as public open space. So there's a long history on other attempts to figure out what the future use of that site would be. I think the most recent was in June of 2022, and that was the vote on the proposal that was, I guess you could say, probably most closely aligned with the guiding principles that were put in place, and it was voted down. So at this stage, the select board has asked to bring this forward to talk about developing as public open space. It's a good time to do that because, a lot of planning work would need to be done, and this is really the opportunity to start budgeting for that. Quick
Thank you.
summary
Thank
of a very long history project.
Over 20 years, I believe we've owned that property. Board, anything? Any opening comments? Public? Anybody would like to speak on it? Mr. Gould? Gold?
Stephen Gold, Grove Street, but I am also speaking as an officer of Friends of Tannery Park. Friends of Tannery Park, excuse me, is now a 501c3 organization. And as such, for the development of the tannery property in cooperation with the town, assuming that the town wants to keep this as public open space, can now seek and will actively seek tax-deductible donations in order to do this. In fact, we have been approached by some people who are more than willing to contribute. I was also a member of the last tannery work group. And one of the things that the town already did at that time was hire a landscape design firm and architects from York, who did a great deal of preliminary work on the tannery property, produced some very generalized ideas, of which I'm going to give each of you just a couple of sketches that came out of that work.
If you give me the pack, I can distribute it for you.
Fine, there's 2 for each.
Thank you, Stephen.
The idea being, we call it the Tannery Park, but I think the way we really think about this is as a community park. And that the facilities in that park would, number one, allow for a permanent space for the Camden Farmers Market, which, as we all know, is the state's oldest farmers market and is a vital part of the community, which has been witnessed by the vote on the last time a previous board tried to accept a commercial project for this land. There's a huge amount of support for keeping this as town-owned property. And I think my intention today is to just encourage you to take that commitment so that the rest of the community can get to work with a designer, which hopefully the town would appropriate some of its forthcoming $180,000 after some of that money,
That's for the ash trees.
after some of that money has been used to identify ash trees in town, and have a plan. And the plan, we talked about things, and we're not advocating specifically that this should happen, that should happen, and that should happen, except the farmers market. Certainly advocating that. But we've talked about things like a toddler's playground. We've talked about things like a pickleball court, picnic area, stone chess tables like they have in various parks. I think there's a member of the select board that felt that we needed a better skate park. That big flat concrete space could be a skating area. There are kits that you can buy for the winter to, flood-proof something, flood it, make it a skating area. There's a zillion things that could be done there to help the community. It was talked earlier today about the assets of a community, the things that attract people to a community. Well, we talk a lot about attracting and maintaining younger people in the community. Well, certainly this is a kind of amenity, facility that young families would be attracted to. Once there's a consensus on the types of things that would go in there, I know that there could be directed fundraising. For example, a toddler's playground. There also seems to be an incredible amount of grants available. My knowledge and understanding is we have an excellent grant writer in the community. And local assets. Recently, Bangor Savings Bank gave $8,500 to the Rockland Farmers Market. There's no reason we can't approach some of our state high-earning banks to contribute to a park in Camden. So I'm hoping that in your discussion, that the commitment will be to keep this as town-owned property, as I believe your agenda says, open space for community use. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Jeff Scott.
Jeff Scott, Ames Terrace. Nice to be here.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Before I get too far, I'm still at the point of when I was walking here, and I walked on this new sidewalk in front of this. I went, whoa, there's a new sidewalk here. That's where I am. And I just want to tip my hat off to the town for that. There's been a lot of good stuff going on. There's still a lot of good stuff going on. So it's great. Questions. I have questions and a little bit of comment. First, I'm struggling a bit where we are in the process right now.
This is it.
So
Openers.
I don't understand. I read a memo in the packet.
You're at night number 1 of the new attempt.
Okay, so this is night 1 of the new attempt to say, hey, let's move this forward as a public space. Is that
Correct. We have a budgeting season upcoming. And if we want to budget, say, money or if we want to,
right?
Give Audra authorization to ask landscape architects for estimates, this would be an ideal time to start thinking about money for that sort of thing.
But wouldn't there also be public? Oh, because we're not selling it, so there wouldn't be a vote or anything like that. Okay.
That's what we have to talk about partially.
Yeah, I think that should be a discussion item. But anyway, I have an idea, which makes this whole process longer, and I apologize for that. But some of these things take a long time. Yeah, I get the process has been really, really long. The ongoing question, I still think, is what we want to put there. And I'm going to put that out there because there are a lot of ideas, and we've seen that. Jeremy has shepherded the latest 4 proposals for redevelopment forward, did a great job with that. And at the end of that, one of the proposals was voted on and it was defeated. But I think the mistake we made was, as a community, is that we put that proposal forward as the choice. I think what we need to do is say, I don't think any proposal, including a park, which I would love to have, I don't think any proposal is going to get over 50% of the vote because there are so many choices. I think a smarter approach is to say, here are 4 ideas. Vote for one in a vote. And there's going to be one that gets 30%, one gets 23%, one gets 15%, and one gets 10%. And the one that gets 33% wins because the majority of the people are for that. I'm just suggesting a process because if you move forward with this, with saying the town's going to develop this, I think there's going to be a lot of interested people that come forward and say, we need low-income housing. We need tennis courts. We need high-density low-income housing. We need more business spaces. I don't know, but those have come up over the years. They have come up and we've dealt with them. But I'm trying to figure out a way that we can succeed and say, hey, this is what happened. So that's my idea.
Thanks, Jeff. Paul?
Good evening. Paul Cartwright from 13 Mill Street. And I was around when we acquired the property. And I just think it's a great move if you're thinking of accepting that this is a public space that can be used for public open space. And I don't think what Jeff said is actually accurate because I think we've been through all these series of attempts at different things. And that's great, but it's been 20 years. And the one that stayed consistently out there that people are interested, I think, and the reason that the last one was voted down is that they would like to see this preserved as a space for the public, that the public will have access to. And that does not mean building a lot of public housing. That means keeping it as an open space. And I hope that's what we're considering this evening is the idea that this will be a park-like space, if not specifically a park. It can be a lot of different things. And I think what Mr. Gold said, that there's a lot of interest in raising money from the private side to do whatever we choose as a town to do. And I think there's a lot of options there that he enumerated that would be of long-term benefit. And just in closing, I want to say this has been going on for a very long time, back and forth, and nothing happens. And this is an opportunity to finally move forward with something that will really benefit all of us. And we've seen the other kinds of things, and we've just not had any genuine, worthwhile proposals from the private sector of, buying that and developing it. They just haven't materialized. And I think for a good reason, that it's not that developable in that sense, but it is very useful to us as a public space. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Anita?
Good evening. It's nice to be back on this side of the world. I've missed you guys. I'm sure you missed me, right? Jeff and I were abroad for a year and a half, so I apologize.
Anita, you do have to introduce yourself. I apologize.
I'm sorry, I thought I said Anita Brosius Scott, 21 Ames Terrace, Camden. So I apologize if there's any portion of this development process that we may have missed. But I think I'm pretty clued in. I tried to catch up. I was very active with the various development groups that were formed and trying to come up with plans. It's true, we've been at it for 20 years, but it's not accurate to say we've been trying to find a solution for 20 years, because most of that time is how to clean up the site and taking on that process of cleaning up the site. And even when the RFP was put out in 2020, the site still was looking forward to needing to clean up, and that the whatever the proposal, successful proposal was, there would be some cleanup involved. So it's important to recognize that this time frame is reflective more of the cleanup than of us trying to decide what to do. It's also the complication of the process itself and the types of proposals that there have been. So I also love the idea of a public park there. But I'm really conflicted about that because, first of all, I'm very aware of the process of what we were trying to look for in the beginning with the work groups. And I'm also very aware of what the criteria were for the successful proposal. And so the RFP, the proposals from the RFP were asked to consider as the best possible solution or response to be mixed use developments that provide for all of the above uses, which actually I'll mention below, would work very well on this site: well-paying jobs, maybe affordable housing, common green space, farmers market. So those were kind of all elements that would be looked upon favorably. Primarily the highest and best uses possible for the property. It was also pointed out, and I'm very aware, having been watching this through the 2 decades, the zoning for this area it's a business opportunity zone, and the assets on the site relate to that. So you've got sewer, water, 3-phase power, high-speed internet. Now, so in terms of highest and best use of the property, I'm not sure a park in that location is the highest and best use of the property when you're looking from the helicopter view of what the town needs. And again, I love the idea of a park. I'm in the neighborhood. I will enjoy a park. Great, that's wonderful. I don't have any objection to that per se. What I'm concerned about is what is best for that property and is what is best for the town. And this is why I looked with favor upon Michael Mullen's proposal, because I felt that he had, and it doesn't have to be that one, but I think it came closest to what we were looking for. And that is some community assets there that the community could use, which was included in his proposal. The ability to have the farmer's market there, which was included in his proposal. But the best part about it that really appealed to me is that he was suggesting that we create maker spaces and, help me, Jeff, what was that word again that I forgot this afternoon? Startup. Places for startup companies to get going on their neat new project. And the reason that I really like that proposal is that in the time that I've been in this town, which is 30 years, that has come clear to me that what I've seen happen time and again is a company comes in, gets a great idea, starts up, and it gets going, and then it's like, we want to expand, and Camden isn't big enough to allow a successful company to expand here. We saw that with MBNA for that matter. It's great for getting an idea started. It's great for sort of this nodule of energy and people and creativity. That's what we have. That's what we've got. And I think that the town can best benefit by seeing that not as a disadvantage. We're too small. People can't grow their business here, but rather as an advantage. What our strength is creativity and borning new ideas. And if they need to grow, they can grow where there's a little bit more space in our neighboring towns. But that's what we have done consistently, and that's what we do well, and we should grab that and go with it. That's why I really liked Michael Mullen's proposal. I also love the community building that he had in it, and he had an idea of an ice skating area, and just there was a place for the community to gather, which I think is great. I agree that we don't have a toddler playground. I agree that we need one somewhere. There are lots of things that we need, but it's this space. I see this space as a really valuable space. Again, valuable for a playground, yes. Valuable for a park, yes. But valuable to who we are and who we want to be. So do we really want to be a bedroom community with great assets to play in? Or do we want to be a dynamic community that is growing and seeing the future and seeing our future as something more than just, a great place for residents? I know at one point we were doing a map about the surrounding towns and what public parks and spaces they had. And I would call some of the other towns and I'd say, so tell me about your parks and spaces. And well, I think we have a boat landing. And, and some of our surrounding towns really had a hard time coming up with their list. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Camden is even more special than I thought. We have a lot for the public. I'm not saying it fulfills every need, but I'm aware that we have a lot, and it does attract people to come and live here because of the quality of life we have here. I'd like to see a town that adds to its dynamism. So enough on that. With regard to the votes that have taken place, the RFP was put out in 2020, and the results were due in mid-October of 2020. So I already mentioned what the requirements were or the hopes were that would come forward in that. And then last year in January, almost 2 years ago, the issue came up at a select board meeting, and Manager Kaler was authorized to create a purchase and sales agreement. And Select Board Chair Falciani said he will work with the town manager for this project. The board needs to do something and bring something forward to residents. So there was an effort to try to get something going back in January of 2022. I don't know exactly what was the result of that plan or discussion.
Anita, we have other people who would like to speak, so if you could
Finish up.
wrap it up, thank you.
Okay, but there was just one other thing I was going to say. May I suggest that what we could do is think what the board could do, or actually, it really, the votes that went to the public, and some of which failed, did not fail on the merits, and there were problems with wording. I remember one of the votes that I was able to participate in was, do you want it to be developed or do you want a playground? And I'm going, where's the mixed use option? So I think there have been some problems in the past with how these votes have been worded, and some of the responses to the votes might have been influenced by, oh, but what is the select board going to do if I vote yes here? What they're going to take it and they're going to do something that we won't be able to have a final say on. And I think the final say was a big, really big issue with voters. And that influenced how they voted, not what they wanted. So I think you just need to find a better way to get a sense of what the public as a whole wants. And I want to speak with great respect for the Friends of the Park and how hard they've worked and how strong a voice they've had, and that's great. But I'm not sure that they are reflecting the full town's wishes. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Anyone else? Ray?
Ray Andreessen again. I came here tonight because I was very excited when I saw this item on the agenda. Finally, a resolution to, or a possible resolution to something that has been on the attention of the board, the town manager, and the citizens of the town for 20 years. I've lived here for 16 years, and I hope that this is a road we're going to go to, a public open space. I would love to see this resolved before I die. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Beatty Parker, Washington Street. I just came as a body to support the Tannery Park idea. I just hope that you leave it mostly open. I always like the idea of small, really small urban housing tucked in, but that space feels like it should be open. It's pretty much what Ray said. Try to keep it open, please, and try to keep the plants that are there, and the river walk is there. Some of these other ideas have been really heavy on building. So that's really all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? You want an alibi? You got to be short, Jeff. Oh, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Cindy Wheeler, 3 Sand Street, Camden. I was working in the town office in codes and assessing back when they originally looked at the tannery and identified what toxicity was there. I had no intention of speaking tonight, and I think Beatty actually said what I feel. I'm part of the Friends of the Tannery. I think it needs to be open. I think it needs to be treated as a park, and as such, if we can also post it, perhaps, just like we do the other parks in town, to say, that we're not expecting people to gather here after I don't know what the parks, what Lake Beach says, what all the other parks say that the highway garage puts up. Had some problems in the past with transients and alcohol and drugs in the park, to the point where I couldn't walk the dog in the evening because people were basically living there. And I mean, that's not happening right now, but it has happened in the past. And I'm, to Steve's point, and I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate, but to Steve's point, I think the use for the farmer's market and then keeping it open for the Riverwalk and for people to use from the market to come have lunch and that kind of thing is a good use. That's all.
Anybody else? I'll let you both go one more time. Please keep it very brief.
Brevity, this is Jeff Scott, 21 Ames Terrace. Brevity is one of my Achilles heel, which is why I had to come back up here.
Sorry,
Jeff. I forgot to mention that early on in this process, when the town first ended up with the property, we had a vote to separate off 25 feet of the property as an easement in perpetuity, which is where the Riverwalk is. Nothing that can be done in the future will ever affect the Riverwalk. It cannot. So what we have is a linear park there where people can walk and sit already, and that will not change no matter what happens with redevelopment. Okay, I just wanted to remind people about that.
Thank you. Steve?
Just very quickly, in terms of the more recent votes, there's been no ambiguity, okay? The proposed industrial development of the property was soundly voted down. So there's no doubt in my mind about the way the town feels about that. Secondly, what's not being mentioned here is when people talk about intense low-income housing or industry or business or whatever, there are so many restrictions on that property because of the way it was mediated, like not digging in the ground, special systems that would have to be imposed if you ever chose to dig in the ground, that keeping open space and a park will be the least harmful and the least potential future liability or problems, which we've already spent enough time tonight talking about potential pollution problems, that this is the peaceful way to deal with this land. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I'm Nina Holland and a resident. I have to put a caveat that Anita and Greg are giving me a ride home, hopefully in spite of my. Anyway, I have been very much in favor of the green space and all the possibilities that I see, and having watched the tries of getting more commercial or unfortunately housing would be quite wonderful, but they just didn't work out, and that I would have been very pleased about it. Just there were unforeseen problems. So I'm just putting my 3 cents into the proposal to be thought about and discussed. And I'm hoping that we'll see a green space there. And I'm hoping I'll get a ride home.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody from the public. Back to the board. Board comments. Allison?
I have come sort of 180 degrees on this. I agree with Anita that the Mullins proposal was the very closest thing that the town had seen in terms of meeting all of the objectives that had originally been identified. I was glad to be able to put that out to voters. And I think if there was anything that was going to fall into that tax revenue generating category that might have been approved by voters, I think that would have been the thing. And it was time for voters to get a chance to vote on something that met all that criteria. What we saw is that it didn't pass. And so to me, I think that we should ask voters, there has been a history of votes saying that we want it to be an economic development in, property and all of these things. And one of the things a couple people asked me was, well, did we ever undo that 2010 vote that said we wanted to do all of these things? And I think that at this point, we should ask people a question very similar to how it's phrased on our agenda. Would you like to keep the tannery property as town-owned public open space? And that would be very telling. My opinion is that it will probably pass, and that if we try to get into right now arguing over all of the landscape design items, that is going to take us down another road that's potentially, fuzzy. And that we should just ask people, are they willing to put aside the work that had been done in the past to make it, an economic development thing in the typical way, and just keep it and decide later, all the things that we might want to do there. For me, what has gotten me away from the development side of it, more on the affordable housing side, and I had a real appetite for trying to push that through also. But the other problem that the town really has is stormwater management. And when you look at that property and its placement, a good part of it is in the floodplain. Even the part that isn't in the floodplain has very frequent flooding problems because of the stormwater stuff coming from other places. It's very low lying. Any of the major development things really would require quite a bit of impervious surface. There are parks these days, you can get a lot of grants for them too, parks that serve a purpose of being like stormwater management entities too. And I think if we're to, jump on that bandwagon of trying to create an open space that meets other objectives of the town, it is serving a purpose. I would be hesitant to get into quartz and concrete and any of that stuff right now, but I would really like to see us just ask the public, do you want to commit to keeping this forever? And then once we had that, then we could feel really ready to say, okay, well, we can stop talking about selling it. It just would be clarifying to me. So that's.
Yeah, I agree with Allison that, on the simple side is to get the town opinion on keep it or sell it. It would be nice if there was additional information as far as to say, okay, so keeping it means this. Keeping it as a town means we lose this X amount of revenue probability for taxing. This means it's going to be X amount probably for some sort of cost. I'm still interested in what additional remediation would be necessary. What things can you do that would cost something? I mean, like there's a big dirt pile in the middle of it. Does that cost anything to get rid of? I don't know even why is it there? I don't know, but it is. But if you're going to make a park, it's got to go. There's different little things that need to be done that are probably on the big scale and some are on the small scale, but what needs to get done to make it something? And we need to know at least some bit of what that looks like, and then to say, okay, keep it or sell it. Jeremy, I know we've talked a little bit before about, it would be, me saying at least, it'd be nice. We had like a one-page thing of, if you did this, it costs this. If you did that, it costs that because of whatever the heck is left sitting there.
Yeah, you're not going to get that in one page.
Tannery Information Center.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
to the
I
Tannery
mean, you're not going to get it
Information
on one page, to be honest. It's
It all depends.
10.
It all depends.
It all depends. I mean, the reality is from a cleanup site, I got word today, DEP is finalizing the VRAP, which has been a long time coming. They're understaffed. So that's the voluntary remedial action plan that we have there. There are 2, actually 3, 4 areas, 5 areas that are capped. So when we're talking about treating stormwater or digging for foundations or anything, we have certain areas that there's contaminated soil that is capped on site. When you dig into that, you have to modify your VRAP with the DEP. There are ways to do that. There's ways to put a foundation on top of that soil and not have it impact anybody either working, living, or staying or recreating on the property. There's ways to do that. But as it currently sits, the site is available for all the uses that one could imagine right now, because we have a VRAP that allows, it was remediated in such a way to address all sorts of different varying uses, whether it be a park user, a construction worker, a resident, all that stuff was done. There would be need work to be done in order, again, to put slabs or buildings or that kind of stuff there. That said, too, if we wanted to put a playground set there, we have to modify our VRAP because we're going to have to put a foundation or some sort of structure underground in order to hold that playground. So all that stuff we need to play out. That help the pile of fill that was originally brought in with the hopes intent to be able to use that on the cap. Unfortunately, we weren't able to use it, but that's going to hopefully be going away as time allows. Public Works did start removing some of it last year, and hopefully they can get moving some of it more. I've tried to work with contractors to get it hauled out of there. It's a little challenging trying to maintain working with Public Works to get it out of there. Does that help?
A little.
Okay.
But
I know
that's
it's
sort
hard
of
to tell you what it would
Yeah.
cost to do anything.
And that's probably why some of these things haven't moved on, because it's so hard to define. But if we can at least come up with some sort of parameters for certain things, that would probably be helpful for people to make an informed choice of keep it or sell it.
I mean, if we were working on a development proposal, we would put it all on top of the developer or the person we were selling it to be responsible for all of it. That's how that would work, especially now. Prior to this, the idea of doing it as part of a cleanup is that you can leverage the EPA project, the funding that EPA gave us, or the developer's funding. We could do pavement in an area where a parking lot would go or a cap would go, and then that would serve the function of a developer's parking lot or a parking lot for houses or whatever it is. But now it's kind of hard to do that now since we don't have a project moving forward. I could try to get some consultants to give us some rough numbers, but it's really about what.
There's really no good cost estimate that we can do.
It's really
We'd be
impossible.
looking for until we have
A use.
direction on what you want us to do.
Right.
And then we move forward with some sort of plan, and then that gets costed out.
Yeah.
That's
It's
the
really
path
the only way to
forward.
do it.
So we've owned this property for 20 years, over 20 years.
Took it for back taxes, yeah.
Took it for back taxes. The only thing that has been consistently across the board, in my opinion, is it's very consistent from votes that the public doesn't want to sell this property. We've never it's gone to vote several times about selling the property, and the public has been overwhelmingly voted to keep that property. That was the Mullins proposal for sure.
It's gone to vote one time. The other times people did vote we've never asked them if they want to keep it explicitly. So,
But
yeah.
I think there's been some fairly clear direction here from the public, in my opinion, that they've wanted to keep this property. I think it's been an absence of leadership on this board to send specific direction out in any regard. I think that the mark of a good community is the quality of life that it provides for its citizens. I think it would be a shame for us to there really ought to be a park on that site. And the reason why there ought to be is because that is the thing where it will actually have the highest impact on the quality of life of the residents of this town. A good, the thing that marks a location is those public green spaces. Even the great cities, which have high-rise buildings and mega developments, they're known for their open green spaces. Think of New York City. Where does everybody want to go in New York City? Central Park, for sure. Think of Paris, right? Beautiful open green spaces. Think of Budapest. All of them. And we're small. We're not those places. But this is an opportunity. It's 3.5 acres. It's walking distance from everybody in town. It's flat. So it's available for any activity you name. You could play soccer there. You could have a picnic there. You have a riverfront, waterfront. It is the perfect space for a park. And we would regret it forever, especially with the cost of real estate these days. We will never have an opportunity again to have a space like that that's available for the public. It just won't happen. I mean, we all know that every house in this town is now worth way too much money for us to go ahead and acquire it and make a space, open space for our citizens. And that's what that space ought to be used for. It ought to be used exclusively for a park for the benefit of the citizens. And there's no economic development there to me that would ever justify being a greater cause, a greater good for this community.
How was it historically that this took a back seat as compared with the public landing and creating green space out of the public landing? Why did that get a higher priority than working with a tannery? I'm just
Well, I
curious.
mean, 20 years ago, it was a more than that. It was a going concern, right? There was a mill there for a long, long time. And then we took it, and then we got some grant money, and then we spent, we have $1 million, I think we took out $1 million bond to deal with the cleanup there. That means we took the buildings down.
And we're still paying for it.
And we're still paying for that. I think we've got 2 more years maybe on that, 2 or 3 more years on paying on that $1 million bond. And then we knew there was contaminated soil there as part of that, kind of came out of that. Multiple, environmental assessments were done over many years.
I gotta say, this is a very common issue that just look around us. The McDougal School in Rockland, same thing. They haven't figured out what they want to do with it. The Thomaston Village Green, same thing there. The Rockport Rest Site, same thing there. I can go up and down the coast and list one of these in almost every community in Maine where the community has had a parcel like this for decades and they've struggled to figure out what to do with it. And most of the time it ends up being public open space.
And unfortunately, ours was contaminated worse than a lot of the other ones.
Right.
So it just even complicated it even more.
But it's always a debate about what's going to be done with it. And the longer it drags on, the harder it is to come to a resolution on what it's going to be. And the default is public open space.
You go back to the original the original group in CDAC. That's kind of why CDAC came to be, was to really look at what's the highest and best use of that property. They came up with what their proposal was. And then, it happens with time. People's attitudes change and their expectations change, and what they anticipate happening there changes over time. 20 years of not doing anything, everyone is like, oh yeah, well, of course that's a park. No, nothing's going to happen there. And then you had the tannery work group that came up with a kind of a modified thing to what the original group did. So it's like,
it's been around and around. And just as far as personal opinion, I think it would be great to have a park. As we know, I've mentioned I used to play baseball there when it was a tannery because I lived on the back side of it essentially. And And it would be great if it could be, if that's what the town wants to go with. Yeah, I'd like it as a park. I like driving around the other day. I mentioned to someone in Portland and on the backside of the Back Bay area, and it's nice. There's a lot of nice fields that are used for athletic purposes, not one particular one, but space available and people are hanging out and enjoying it. And this is in a nice location as far as for the, Mill Street and Ingraham's old store that's no longer there. That is, part of town that there are a lot of residences that they would probably enjoy that. We just have to weigh it against, is it better to have the green space or is it better to have the revenue? And it comes down to that. And what's the care and feeding for it? So if we can do a low cost care and feeding that makes it available for people to use, play, athletic events, probably a great thing.
Sophie, do you have anything?
I think yes, it's 20 years, and I'm not shocked that it's 20 years because it's a long, complicated conversation. I think it's all a matter of trade-off, and I'm just trying to figure out, is the workforce housing crisis more acute than a toddler's park? So we'll have to make those choices, and the town has to make those choices. I think it's a amazing space to have workforce housing for exactly all the arguments you listed. It's within walking distance. We can have a green space there. We can make it affordable. If we change the zoning to have like density housing, I don't think we need to have necessarily an either or, and that we can have an and instead, and really create a place there that there's a park. The river park is endowed or whatever we want to call it. So maybe, and at the same time, I understand the fatigue of going through tannery park processes and proposals and the desire to resolve this issue once and for all. My understanding also in the remediation issue is a park would have to have some kind of remediation as well, right? We could not just turn it into an open green space like this, right?
No, we could.
We could just.
Yeah, and when we did the cleanup, it was designed looking at all of the uses, and they have them in their categories, and you need to meet certain standards to be a park user, construction worker. I mean, I just said those earlier. Those are actual terminology that they use in EPA and DEP's rules. Right now, I mean, there's a reason that the farmer's market's still there is because they can be there. It's not a contaminated site that they can't be on. People can't recreate on. People can't walk on. That's why we capped it the way we did. The areas on the river bank, right? If you walk the area or looked at it after the cleanup, I mean, there was a couple of significant areas on the riverbank and on the trail that were remediated, and it was all replaced back to the way it was. So certainly it can stay as is and be used as a park. Anytime you dig into the soil,
Then you need to.
that's for utilities, that's for a foundation, that's for anything. Even sticking a pole, a post in the ground, technically need to modify your VRAP.
I think it's really a matter of what the town, what
It
the
is.
people of Camden want to do with it, and where the energy is going to be. I agree that if we can have a short process and get to a resolution, that would be great, because we have the tannery cannot occupy all our time. We have other projects that also require our attention. So not very helpful, I'm afraid, but.
Good points. Allison and then Stephanie, we're getting late. So
I would just also say quickly that right now it is being used as a park. There are things that we could always do to make it safer and better. I think there's a whole area along the riverbank that really should be improved. It doesn't, from a regulatory standpoint, we're not required to do that. But, if it's going to be it already is, the thing is, it already is being used as a park. So we don't actually have to do anything just to ask people, do you want to commit to keeping it and continuing to improve it? People use it every day, and the middle school practices there. There's a lot of park use that's already happening right now. So
Stephanie, anything?
Yeah, I would just, I mean, I echo Anita's point that it is clearly, it's a divisive topic. But right now, where I feel that I've talked with so many people in town, the park space seems to be the way that the people that I talk to at least want to go. So I am not opposed to putting it out to a vote of some sort of, do you want to keep it as a public space? Do you want, or however it needs to be worded? There are definite uses that I would like to see there as well, but that's, I think, down the road. I think making the decision on what the town wants to do with that spot, I think it should go out and ask them on a vote somehow. I know it kind of kicks the can down the road, but I kind of feel like we have to ask them is how I feel. I mean, it's been so long. I feel like we have to ask point blank, do you want it to be do you want to have the town retain this property?
That's what would protect it too. That's what would provide the protection that if people want to commit the town to doing that, we have to ask them. Otherwise, we can keep, each new select board can keep having this new discussion.
So we're getting late here. Audra, for that purpose, if we wanted to put this on a ballot, would this be and Bill too, would this be something where we could have a binding ballot question? And would that be, could we do it in March? Or would we have to wait till June? There's an election in March.
Oh,
I would not do it in March.
Not in March. Okay, I'm just asking, so
Yeah,
June.
I wouldn't do it in March.
Okay,
I think it's June.
June.
Yeah. It doesn't change much, in my opinion, on like what actually is going to happen out there on the ground.
Sure. So the purpose of this discussion is kind of to see where the board wants to be. And what I've heard consistently, and I'm not opposed to this either, because I think that we're going to have a park if we put a town vote, is that we'll try and get something on the ballot for June. Anybody? Okay.
That would be a huge accomplishment.
I like it.
Provided people vote yes. If they vote no, we have to go back to the drawing board, but.
I think, Anita, we're done. I mean, we're almost 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Do appreciate your comments. So what is the process there? We'll get an agenda item in the future to create a ballot.
I think,
a
yeah,
warrant article.
you can keep it very, very simple. I mean, Bill and I can work on the question that'll be put on the warrant. And when you have your public hearing on the warrant article,
Right.
it would be on, and we're not talking an appropriation or anything here. You're just putting a question out to them and getting an answer.
Excellent.
And structuring it in a way where it's a binding article.
All right. I think it was a good discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody in the public, for your comments as well. Much appreciated.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
We almost just all like faded away.
5-0, motion carried.